Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome back. You're watching I-24 News. We're coming to you live from Tel Aviv on this day 27 of Israel's war with Hamas. And Hamas has claimed responsibility for 12 rockets that were fired at central and northern Israel earlier this evening. There was a direct hit on the high street in the northern town of Kiryat Shmona, a town that has been largely evacuated of its residents. 2 people were moderately wounded. Rockets also fired at central Israel. A house took a direct hit, no reported casualties there. And the IDF has confirmed that 20 Israeli soldiers have now lost their lives in the fighting since October 7th. Well, the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, says Israel is making good progress in Gaza with many dozens of Hamas operatives killed. And the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, also commented on that earlier. Take a listen.
I'm here with soldiers that were the first ones on scene in the immediate hours after the attack on October 7th, that fought bravely, saved lives, lost their friends, and blocked the enemy. We are in the midst of the campaign. We have significant achievements. We are advancing inside Gaza. We also have losses, painful losses. Every soldier killed is a whole universe, and our hearts are with the families. But let me make this clear. Like one of the soldiers here said, nothing will stop us.
Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking earlier. Let me introduce my studio guest for you. Oren Orbitun is a former IDF commander. Good evening to you. And Ambassador Alon Liel is the former head of the Israeli diplomatic mission to Turkey. Welcome to you as well. We'll be talking to our guests in just a moment. First, though, let's head to southern Israel and our correspondent Jonathan Regev. Jonathan, 20 IDF soldiers now confirmed killed in the war with Hamas.
Yes, it's a difficult war. No one thought that this will not happen. It's a difficult war. Just to understand the losses on the other side, we understand that only in the past few hours we're speaking of roughly 130 terrorists killed. That's only in the past few hours. So the losses on the other side are far bigger. But that doesn't mean that the IDF will not go through difficulties. It's a difficult war. Apart from those 20 killed, let's speak about the objectives of the IDF, mainly to cut the Gaza Strip into 2 parts, north and south. We heard for about 10 days or so that the civilian population in the northern Gaza Strip was urged to head south, and now we understand that the IDF is basically cutting the Gaza Strip into 2, entering a little bit to the south of Gaza City. We have to understand the Gaza Strip is a narrow place, meaning the distance once you enter Gaza and until you reach the Mediterranean coast and cut it to 2, the distance is not it's not a long distance, but there are many challenges along the way. The IDF is going through that route south of the city of Gaza and cutting the Gaza Strip into 2, with other forces coming into Gaza from the north and basically encircling Gaza City itself. That seems to be the main objective of the Israeli army right now.
Right, and Jonathan, we just heard from Minister Benny Gantz. He says that this war is the most complicated for Israel ever.
Yes, of course, because we have to understand that it takes part in civilian areas, but those civilians are the human shields protecting the terrorists. The terrorists are fighting from tunnels that are dug inside people's homes, from hospitals, from mosques, from schools, and trying to make that distinction between civilians and terrorists inside a densely populated area is, of course, a very challenging mission.
All right, Jonathan, thank you very much. Jonathan Regev there in southern Israel. All right, well, let's talk to our guest here in the studio. We've got Alon Liel, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, jetting into Israel tomorrow. This amid reports that he will be asking Israel to commit to a humanitarian pause, not a ceasefire, a humanitarian pause for the hostages, but also for humanitarian aid to Gaza. What do you make of that?
First, I'm not a military guy, but I understand the request, but I'm not sure with these kind of circumstances, very complicated, as you just said, you can have a pause. In order to have a pause, you need a minimal amount of trust. And obviously, trust has been lost before the 7th of October, but definitely after, and I doubt it if such a pause is possible. What I think could be done, parallel, if you take the issue of the hostages and you isolate it and deal with it politically, diplomatically, parallel. It's very important even to the military. If we can solve this issue in the next few days, the attack will look differently. So I think maybe we can channel this Biden request to the issue of the hostages and deal with the hostages, with the people who are captive there, separately, parallel to the war.
Henri Orbison, you are a former military man. Given what you've seen, what's going on in Gaza now, Benny Gantz says it's a very complex, very difficult battle. 20 soldiers already lost. Do you think Israel would commit to a pause in fighting, or should it just ignore those calls from the United States?
So far, what the Israeli military is doing is, in my point of view, is very good. They walk slowly, not that far as in Tzuk Eitan. In Tzuk Eitan, they go in very fast, and we lost
2014.
In 2014, exactly. So we have a fight face to face against the terrorism, the Hamas people. Every day, we kill many of them, and unfortunately, we also lose our soldiers. We need to attack very deeply and very hard the Hamas. The Hamas is an organization terror, which we need to destroy them for very strongly. And from my point of view, is there's no, we don't asking to go to fight in Gaza, but it's happened to us, and we need to do this because we have the civilians, in about 242 civilians, babies, ladies, under the tunnels of the Hamas. We need to bring them home back.
Well, I want to ask you about the tunnels. We know that's where the Hamas fighters are hiding. To what extent can they be destroyed by bombing from the air, and how much has to be that the soldiers have to go in there physically?
To fight in the area where the civilians is really difficult, especially with the tunnels of the Hamas. Build more than 500 kilometers tunnels under Gaza. So they can build a nice building, a nice neighborhood, but they choose to build a tunnel, terrorism tunnels, and our soldiers need to fight, and very carefully, because otherwise it's going to be very worse for us too.
Right, okay. Well, let's take a brief pause. We're going to head to the north of Israel, where, as I say, there was a barrage of rockets fired earlier, rockets that have been claimed by Hamas. And one was a direct hit on the high street of the town of Kiryat Shmona. Our Pia Steckelbach's in the north with the latest. Pia.
Indeed, Laura, Hamas in southern Lebanon claiming responsibility for that barrage of rockets, saying that they fired 12 rockets towards that area as retaliation for the massacre of Israel that Israel is conducting in Gaza. There we're speaking about 4 rockets that fell down, 3 into open territory, 1 falling inside the city of Kiryat Shmona, sparking a massive fire there, injuring 2. A 24-year-old man has been brought to hospital and is now undergoing a surgery. He sustained wounds from shrapnels. Another about 41-year-old man sustained wounds from a burn. He is in serious condition there as well. They're in the hospital in Safed and Sfat right now, a city that also had rocket alert earlier this evening, a city that is more than 20 kilometers away from the Lebanese border. And that is also just part of that broader picture that has been evolving today. Throughout the last hours, we have seen 3 times rocket alerts triggered in different communities alongside the border. The first barrage of mortars and also anti-tank missiles was fired towards Israeli army posts alongside the border in different regions there. Then the second barrage of rockets was fired towards the area of Safed, and then the third barrage, the latest one, onto the city of Kiryat Shmona. There, a city that has been widely evacuated also throughout the last week. And also earlier this week, another rocket directly impacted a house there, setting it on fire. No casualties there earlier this week. But Laura, this really shows you that these preemptive measures that the Israeli Home Front Command are taking show their effects, as these cities are targeted by forces there in southern Lebanon. And we've been seeing an uptick in these skirmishes between Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies there in the region, Hamas also being part of that in recent days there. That coming amid the announced speech that Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is scheduled to hold tomorrow. So all eyes are on him in terms of what he's going to announce or not announce tomorrow there, Laura.
Yeah, because the feeling is, Pia, isn't it, is that Hezbollah has not unleashed its full potential, as it were, on Israel yet. They do have thousands of missiles, thousands of fighters. For some reason, they have been holding back. They did threaten to launch an offensive on Israel if Israel launched a ground offensive in Gaza, which it has done now. So his words tomorrow, Nasrallah's words tomorrow, will be key, won't they?
Right, Laura. All eyes are on what he's going to say tomorrow. You're right that these skirmishes between Israel and Hezbollah have been relatively contained in terms of what we've seen within the last 3 weeks. They have intensified. Also, in terms of the use of force, there are also rockets coming as far as 20 kilometers into northern Israel. But these skirmishes have been contained, and you're right, the northern front has not become a full-scale front in this war yet, as Hezbollah, of course, is also working together with other local proxies there in southern Lebanon, Hamas, also other Iranian proxies there. And we can assume that the shots are being called from Iran there. There's constant communication between Hezbollah and the Iranian regime. And Hezbollah has really throughout the year all the time emphasized their solidarity with the Palestinian cause and them reacting to what the Palestinians are fighting for, especially also in this war. The Gaza ground offensive has been mentioned as a red line here, though we have not seen the northern front developing in a full-scale front there. That might change any time, though. You see how volatile the situation is, how tense the situation is, and how also we see an uptick of force there, of operational force, of offensive force that is being used there, not only by Hezbollah, but also by Hamas there in southern Lebanon.
Pia, thank you very much. Pia Steckelback there, and I should say the IDF has said that it holds Hezbollah responsible for any strike that comes out of Lebanon. Hezbollah does control southern Lebanon. Well, earlier today, I-24 News spoke to the former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. He fought in the last war against Hezbollah in 2006. Here's what he told our Nicole Zedek. Take a listen.
I think Hezbollah should take into account that the degree of destruction that they will bring upon Lebanon if they start up with us will be immense. And Nasrallah previously said about the Second Lebanon War, which I participated in, that had he known of the Israeli reaction, he would not have initiated it. So I suggest he recall his own statement. Well, I think a lot depends on seeing the process actually in the south all the way through. The government has set an objective of eradicating Hamas. We need to do that. We need to, the government and Israel, to deliver on that very solid promise. I think that will reflect not only to the communities around Gaza and in the Negev, but also to the communities here. And in fact, it'll resonate, and it's being watched by all of the region.
Israel's former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett speaking to i24 News earlier today. Well, with us now, David Daoud is a Hezbollah and Lebanon research analyst at United Against a Nuclear Iran. He's also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Great to have you with us, David. Hezbollah hasn't fully entered the war yet, has it? Who is holding back, do you think? Is it Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, or is it Iran?
Thank you for having me. I think it's a bit of both, in that Iran, in its relationship with its proxies, there is a hierarchical relationship where Iran does order its proxies to act as it needs to. I mean, I don't think Hezbollah wanted to enter the war in Syria willingly, but it had to because the Iranian regime was necessary for them. They viewed it as an existential battle. At the same time, the Iranian regime takes into account the domestic considerations of its proxies. In terms of Hezbollah, you have Lebanon's economic collapse that, if were to be compounded with the miseries of a destructive war with Israel, where there will probably and most likely not be economic recovery aid coming from the Gulf states or the Western states, kind of like we saw after 2006, or in contrast, rather, than what we saw in 2006. You'll have Lebanese ire growing against Hezbollah, including potentially from within its support base. And that's something for Hezbollah to consider before it fires any shots. And it's something that Iran, not wanting to lose its star proxy or damage its star proxy unnecessarily, may take into consideration as it's formulating what orders to give Hezbollah.
And what do you think is the feeling inside Lebanon then? We saw the caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati, didn't we, earlier in the week, saying, you know, he'd credited Hezbollah with being smart so far and not getting too involved. I mean, they must be pretty terrified inside Lebanon, given that their country is already on the precipice.
I would say that's entirely accurate. And this isn't the first statement that's been issued by a Lebanese official, including Mikati himself. Mikati, I think 2 weeks ago now, which feels like a lifetime ago, had said that he was in conversation with Hezbollah and they had promised not to intervene. Abdullah Abu Habib, the foreign minister, said something similar, that Hezbollah would continue basically these low-level activities, but unless Israel harasses Lebanon, then Hezbollah would enter. So it seems like the messaging from the Lebanese government, from Lebanese officialdom to Hezbollah, is keep us out of this. But again, at the end of the day, as much as Hezbollah's domestic Lebanese considerations weigh on it, its loyalty and its duties to the resistance axis, to the Islamic regime in Iran, are more important. That trumps everything.
So what, David, should we be listening out for when Nasrallah speaks tomorrow?
It's hard to predict, to be honest. I could see the speech going one of three ways, and kind of in degree of likelihood, we could see Nasrallah, kind of classical Nasrallah, threatening Israel not to provoke, not to preempt any or engage any preemptive action in Lebanon, and to then continue this border harassment that Israel's been experiencing, either directly through Hezbollah or, like today with Kiryat Shmona, through Hamas, which claimed the attack. And this could increase as Israel becomes more committed to Gaza and therefore less able to kind of devote resources to the northern border. And that way, Hezbollah has its cake and eats it too. Less likely, but kind of in a middle tier, is that Hezbollah times the speech, or Nasrallah's speech, with theatrical action, a military action kind of similar to the INS Khanit strike in 2006, where Nasrallah gives a play-by-play. But this action could lead to unintended consequences, and that's something that should be weighing on Nasrallah's mind. There's also been American calls for restraint on the Israelis, and this could be kind of something that encourages Nasrallah to maybe engage in a little bit more brinksmanship. The least likely, but third option, is that Nasrallah declares war tomorrow, but I think that's least likely only because they've been telegraphing this speech for so long, and Hezbollah would prefer, given their previous behavior, to engage in a surprise action rather than kind of build all this anticipation, build readiness on the Israeli side, and then open war. But again, the ultimate say is with Iran. We know that Ismail Ghani is back in Lebanon, consulting with Hezbollah, and I have no doubt that they are discussing what the next step should be.
It will certainly be fascinating to see what he has to say tomorrow, won't it? I wonder if you have any information, because there's a report in the Wall Street Journal, David, I don't know if you've seen it. The US has intelligence that the Russian paramilitary Wagner group could be providing Hezbollah with an advanced air defense system. I mean, what is the relationship between Hezbollah and Wagner?
Well, the relationship between Hezbollah and Russia goes way back. I mean, Russia does not consider Hezbollah or Hamas, for that matter, a terrorist group. Russia and Iran, Hezbollah's parent, essentially, are in an alliance in Ukraine. They fought together side by side in Syria. They have similar interests. Hezbollah and Russian special forces fought next to each other in Syria. They share an interest in weakening U.S. power projection in the region. And if you damage the United States' most critical and most powerful ally in the region, you end up damaging U.S. influence and U.S. power projection in the region. So there is a shared interest between kind of the Russian worldview and the resistance axis worldview led by Iran, of which Hezbollah is a part. So I would say it's totally in line with their interest to be supplying weapons to Hezbollah.
David, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. David Dowd there, Hezbollah expert at United Against a Nuclear Iran. Well, Germany has announced that it's banning the activities of Hamas as well as the pro-Palestinian group Samidun. Hamas is already designated as a terrorist organisation in Germany. The Interior Ministry says both groups are spreading both anti-Israel and anti-Semitic propaganda.
Samidun is an international network that spreads anti-Israel and anti-Jewish propaganda under the guise of a so-called solidarity organization for prisoners in various countries. Samidun also supports and glorifies various foreign terrorist organizations, especially Hamas. Holding spontaneous celebrations here in Germany in response to the terrible terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel, as we are witnessing in Berlin, is unbearable. This shows Samidun's anti-Semitic, inhumane worldview in a disgusting way.
Well, let's go to Berlin. We're joined now by correspondent James Jackson. So, James, what is new from the Interior Ministry? Because Hamas was already designated as a terrorist organisation in Germany, wasn't it?
Yes, and of course it was designated as a terrorist organisation across the whole EU. So I don't actually think that this ban of Hamas, although it is now official, it actually says that much. However, maybe more important is the ban of Samidun, which is seen by some as a front organisation for the PFLP. There are about 450 Hamas supporters in Germany, which is a significant number, but compared to how many Palestinians there are in Germany, which might go up to 30,000 or above, I think it's quite low. Samidun have previously been allowed to organise openly, and so I think this will impact them. They infamously and sadly gave out baklava to celebrate the 7th of October terrorist attack against Israel, and so this ban is a reaction against that. I think what we're seeing within the German government, you have to remember this is a coalition government, and there's almost a competition between different coalition partners to see who can be more on the side of Israel. The Climate and Energy Minister and Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck gave a very well-received speech yesterday when he asked Muslims in Germany to distance themselves from anti-Semitism and explained that Israel's security is part of Germany's Staatsräson, which means its reason to exist, its reason of state. So we're seeing different coalition partners playing the role. So that Habeck was from the Greens. He gave that speech yesterday, and this announcement today came from Nancy Faeser, who's the Interior Minister, who's part of Chancellor Scholz's SPD. So I think we're seeing it from all the government, and there is something of a consensus on this in German society, or at least in German politics, which I don't think you can say about in many other countries in Europe.
And we have seen, James, haven't we, alarming spikes in anti-Semitism across Europe. What is the situation in Germany, and are the authorities getting on top of it?
It's mixed news in Germany, really. There's definitely been a sharp rise in Austria, where it's been 300 times this amount last year. In terms of Berlin, there was this Samidun celebration of the terror attack, but that was only about 40 people who went to that, which compared in one of the most Palestinian parts of Europe, the Sonnenallee. So quite a small turnout there. There have been cases of Stars of David allegedly sprayed on people's houses who are Jewish. But I have to say that Berlin's police president did also say that in terms of numbers, there haven't been any more attacks against Jews in Germany than there would be normally. Sadly, there is obviously too much anti-Semitism at any point in Europe. So I think it's a mixed picture. there have been cases of Jewish restaurants, one in West Berlin called Baba, which have asked the police for protection and have got nothing because they're not a synagogue. Now, of course, a restaurant for many Jews is as much of a place for meeting their members of the community as a synagogue is. Synagogues get 24-hour protection in Germany from the police, whereas some people are questioning why don't other elements of Jewish life today in Berlin receive the same amount of protection and across Germany.
Well, there's quite a large Israeli community in Berlin as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. I'm in East Berlin, and on my street there are 3 or 4 Israeli restaurants. So many Israelis, most of them secular, many of them on the left, and some of whom have even come to avoid their IDF service. So it's a very interesting city to see how this conflict is represented, with a very large Palestinian population, a large Israeli population, many of them on the Israeli left, of course not all of them, and then we have the German politicians who are more pro-Israel and more supportive of Israel's actions or Israel's government than many of the Israelis in Berlin.
All right, James, thank you very much. James Jackson there over in Berlin. And Alon Liel, it's very worrying to see this rise in anti-Semitism around the world, isn't it?
If I look at the diplomatic scene, I think what matters now, especially what is critical, is the region, the Middle East, not Europe. And the situation with the United States is obviously well known. Egypt and Jordan, these are the 2 critical players diplomatically at the moment. Israel cannot afford losing both of them. In a way, we lost Turkey, but it's not a big damage because the relations with Turkey recovered only about a year and a half ago, and there was no much substance. I'm not speaking economically, but no military relations. With Egypt and Jordan, we have an alliance. We have a military alliance with both of them. If we lose one of them, or God forbid, both of them, we will be having a huge problem with the rest of the war and after the war. So, and this will of course affect the Emirates, and it might affect what was built so far with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So the critical diplomatic circle is the Middle East.
Hold on to that thought for one moment. We have to take a short break. We'll pick up on that after the break. Stay with us. We're going to break. We'll be back in a few minutes.
מסתתרת המולדת בישובה.
הכיר אותו ואהב אותו בדרכו.
וילדים על השבילים.
And with that we have our future and we'll be victorious. How are we going to do this? I don't know, but... And we need...
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do.
We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Welcome back, and we continue our coverage of the war between Israel and Hamas. This is day 27 of the war. The IDF chief of staff says that Israel is making good progress inside Gaza, with dozens of terrorists killed. Well, today Israel revised upwards the number of hostages who are being held in Gaza. The number now at least 242. Our Bacha Levintal is at a gathering tonight of the families of hostages taken from Kfar Aza. That's one of the communities worst hit by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. And Bacha is with us now. Bacha, what's happening?
Right, Laura, so those families have somewhat dispersed in the last couple of hours, but you're correct, they were here. That has seemed to be sort of a home base for a lot of the families and the relatives and even the friends of some of the hostages that are taken. As you mentioned, that number now rising to over 240, and again continues to rise as more of the missing turn out to be kidnapped into the Gaza Strip by Hamas. I'm going to move out the way just while I'm talking so you can see the table, but basically the group that was here today, as you mentioned, from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, this is a kibbutz that is just off the eastern side of the Gaza Strip and is one of the hardest hit in terms of those that were murdered as well as kidnapped. So there were a fortune of the families here today gathering to demand that they want their family, they want their friends, they want their relatives returned home, not tomorrow, not when this war ends, immediately, saying that civilians should not be part of a casualty in terms of war and should not be involved in the war to begin with, and also pleading to the international community to bring them home. The visuals that you're seeing now are all over the world of this giant Shabbat table that has been set up with the hostages, with pictures of the hostages, of over 240 of them, as an indication that many of these families that are now displaced from both the south as well as communities in the north are having their Shabbat tables on the weekends without certain family members. So this really serving as a stark reminder that for the time being they do have family members in the Gaza Strip being held by Hamas. They are being called collateral damage because they worried that the IDF, as you also mentioned, now operating in the Gaza Strip, because many of the hostages are being kept in the tunnels above the ground as well as in civilian homes, it's relatively difficult to keep an eye on exactly where these hostages are. And of course that puts the families here in a very difficult position, knowing that there needs to be the military eradication of Hamas as a terror organization, but fearing what that means for their families, their relatives, their friends currently being held in the Gaza Strip as well, Laura.
Yeah, an agonising challenge for the Israeli army, isn't it? Bacha, thank you very much indeed. Bacha Levintal there. Well, let me remind you of our studio guest this hour. Oren Orbitun is a former IDF commander in a counter-terrorism unit, and Ambassador Alon Liel is the former head of Israel's diplomatic mission to Turkey. We were speaking about a bit about diplomacy and Israel's relationships in the region before the break. You were in Turkey for many years. Where do you see that relationship now? We know the two countries have a broad trade relationship, but following President Erdogan's comments this week, how can that relationship continue?
You know, there is one guy running the Israeli desk in Turkey, and his name is Recep Tayyip Erdogan. From the day he took over, he put Israel on his private desk and is running its affairs. Now, Erdogan, for us, has two hats. He is two different people. He is the religious leader of Turkey, and he is the political leader of Turkey. And as he plays these two roles, and sometimes it can work simultaneously. Now it cannot. In the last 2 years, he worked with the head of running a country of 85 million people, and he reached the conclusion that it's good for Turkey to have relations with Israel, diplomatic relations, economic relations, and he was running after us, and we hesitated. But we finalized the diplomatic accord, we exchanged ambassador, even met our leaders, including Netanyahu last month.
He was due to come to Israel, wasn't he?
Yes. And on the 7th of October, I would say a week after, when the attacks in Gaza started massively, he changed to his religious head, and he became the leader of the Islamic Brotherhood of Turkey and completely dropped us. He dropped us last week in his speech in the parliament, and then when he organized on Saturday a huge anti-Israeli demonstration, and he spoke there, and his wife spoke there. So,
but do you think the relationship can be repaired, or you think that's it?
I don't think they can repair it from the point of view of any normal political exchange, coordination. Our diplomats are here already for almost 10 days. Their ambassador is somehow still here in Tel Aviv, but I don't see the relations recovering for a long period of time. The question is more on the economic context, because the economic relations survived the previous crisis with Turkey. They might go on, but I see a long crisis in the relations with Turkey from now on.
Okay, all right, thank you, Alon. Oren, let's talk a bit about security and the situation in the West Bank, because this was Iran's three-point plan, wasn't it? Attack Israel from the south via Hamas, the north via Hezbollah, and also Hamas support in the West Bank. Do you think Israel has managed to keep a lid on the unrest there?
Definitely, we need to open the eyes in the West Bank. I joined in the West Bank as a young soldier in the undercover unit in the first Intifada. And terror is a terror everywhere, especially the Palestinian terrors is similar, the same. I saw a video, I see videos of the Palestinian Authority forces that they train as the same Hamas trained from the October 7th, so we cannot...
in the West Bank.
In the West Bank.
They were also training to do something.
The same things they do. They train the same things. They even today they kills one of the civilians in the West Bank. They try every day to kill civilians and also the military's security from IDF. The Shin Bet give the information for the Israeli forces, and we attack in the West Bank every day, but still it's not enough, because in the West Bank it can burn for the third Intifada immediately. So Iran play with the two organization, Hamas and Hezbollah. And Hezbollah in the north also want to start a war with Israel, okay? But the Lebanese people, the Lebanese civilians don't really want it's happened, because they saw what's happening in Gaza and how Israeli destroyed Gaza. So it's not good for the Lebanese civilians.
Well, I want to talk about Gaza and the West Bank, because of course Israeli forces have been over the past 2 years, would you say, carrying out consistent raids to confiscate weapons that these groups such as the Lion's Den and Hamas affiliated groups have managed to build up. Obviously there was nothing of the sort in Gaza, because Israel doesn't have any security control there. But looking forward, the geography is much more complicated in the West Bank, isn't it? Because you've got the communities all mingled together. You've got the Jewish communities and you've got the Palestinian communities. I mean, looking long term, how do you see Israel having any kind of security in the West Bank?
The Israeli have definitely much more control in the West Bank than in Gaza. The Israeli have many intelligence information. We know nearly each person, each civilian in West Bank. We know his family, we know what he's doing, because we have also a contact with Abu Mazen, basically, and the mukhabarat of them. So it's a time to time.
Security services.
Exactly, it's a security service. But it's time to time, it depends. For today, I understood that Israel doesn't want to give them the money. So definitely we have to open the eyes, because
that's a row between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister Smotrich about whether to give the Palestinians the tax.
Exactly.
What is your thought on that?
My point of view is not to give any money and not to give any aid humanitarians for the Gaza until we get any information for the civilian of us in Gaza, because it's unhuman to keep babies, ladies, and we don't know nothing about them.
But in terms of giving the tax money to the Palestinian Authority that Israel is holding, do you think that Israel should do that?
Again, I think, first of all, Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, for me, it's the same things.
Oh, right, okay.
We need some information about our civilians, and then we can talk about it more.
Okay, Alon Liel, your thoughts on that, and do you think that the Palestinian Authority, as it is now, will be playing a major role in a post-Hamas Gaza, because they will have to have some kind of leadership, won't they?
Look, there is no doubt the military challenges are big, maybe huge, but this war cannot end on a military note. All the previous 5 rounds ended on a military note, with a military victory. On a military victory, we won the war and we went back to business. Here, there will have to be a political ending to the war. We will have to create, after the military side of it, after we remove Hamas from power, we'll have to go to the diplomatic, to the political issues. Otherwise, we start from scratch, and so the most natural thing would be...
Because just to interrupt, there's been no talks of any kind between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, official peace talks, since 2014.
Yes, 10 years without
10
any
years
talks.
of no talks at all.
I think this was part of our problem, because the anger was building up and erupted now. But I think there is no possibility to think on an Egyptian solution. We will not allow to host them in the Negev, so we will have to come back to a Palestinian solution in Gaza. And I don't know if it will be Abu Mazen or somebody else, but the Americans will have to be involved, the Europeans will have to be involved, the whole international community will be involved in the reconstruction of Gaza. This war will have to end politically, hopefully with an agreement, and then in a way, if we remove Hamas from power, we may be able to reunite the Palestinians under one leadership and talk with the Palestinian leadership that can really deliver. So far, it was impossible. I think this is the big change.
Do you foresee a situation where Israel would ever concede land in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria?
Physically, technically, it might happen. I think it'll be wrong to do so. We have 2.5 million Palestinians that we control in the West Bank. We have over 2 million Palestinians inside Israel. We don't need to control another 2 plus million Palestinians under Israeli control. It will have to be controlled or by an international force that will control Gaza temporarily. I don't see this happening. Nobody in the world is volunteering. We never wanted anyone outside Israel to control our security and so on. So it will have to be given to Palestinians, to leadership of Palestinians to run the place place and hopefully this could be a new base to a political solution. I hope two-state solution, but this is the big difference from the situation we have now. When the forces will remove Hamas, the big challenges are still in front of us, not behind us. And it has to be, we have to start thinking about it now, although it's very difficult because we don't have the military ending yet, and we don't know how it will look exactly. But we have to remember one thing. We will have to stay in this region after the war too. And if the result of the war will be such that we cannot maintain the relations with Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, the Emirates, what will we do? So we have to think on staying here, coexisting here with our neighbors after this war too.
Oren, Israel has the strongest military in the region, the best intelligence in the region, and still this happened to Israel. Do you agree that there has to be a political situation going forward?
Unfortunately, the world everywhere, even the USA, even the Russian, the surprise when the terrorist attacks them, for example, in the 9/11 or in Russia, between in the Afghanistan. So also we was surprised in the October 7. But I agree, the world will need to finishing by the political way, but we cannot do any politics with a terror organization. When you have a terror organization like the Hamas, we need to kill them first. We need to clear this area and then to negotiate with the political sides. So first of all, our missions is to kill Hamas, to kill ISIS. Those organizations, we need to kill them. And believe me, Egypt, Jordan, and all the rest of the country don't want the Hamas anymore. They fed up with the Hamas.
Israel is doing the dirty work.
Israel need to do the dirty things, and we will do this. We will do this, and we believe our Prime Minister. We trust the army. We trust the RDF, the Shin Bet, and we are strong enough, and we will win.
We certainly trust the army, don't we? All right,
definitely.
All right, thank you. Well, on October 7th, there were many victims, but there were also many stories of heroism. And the small town of Ofakim was home to one. The town came under attack by terrorists. One woman was in charge of fighting back, staff officer of the Israeli police. More on Teji. Here's more in her report now.
The October 7th massacre could have been a greater tragedy if not for the men as well as the women who put their lives on the line. One of them is Moran, a mother of two, from the small town of Ofakim, 15 miles from the Gaza Strip.
On Saturday morning, we were awakened by a missile alert. We understood that this is a serious situation. In my district, people are getting hurt. A mother and her son were killed. I turned on the police radio and heard things I hadn't heard in over 20 years.
Moran, a staff officer in the Israeli police, was hearing her co-workers battling the terrorists that entered Israel, many of them targeting the Nova festival being held just by the Gaza border. She rushed to the closest battle location. It was all of 250 yards from her home. Police were already there, but she took command.
I ran inside. I see cops here and there. What we know at this point is that we were dealing with 4 terrorists. Later, we caught 5. They barricaded themselves into a house with hostages.
This house of another hero, Rachel and her husband David, were held hostage for 20 hours. While the police and the terrorists were battling outside, Rachel kept feeding the terrorists cookies and drinks, trying to steal time until the police could burst in. Under fire, Moran tried to find shelter while moving forward to the battle area.
We were under heavy fire. They were shooting at us from the direction of the house. A hand grenade is thrown at us, but thank God it didn't explode. We hid behind the garbage, which gave us some kind of a shelter. and we start shooting at them. 2 policemen were wounded, and we extracted them under fire. We understood that we needed to call the special units.
At this point, the district commander arrived. Moran updated him on the situation. They decided to stabilize the situation until additional forces would arrive to negotiate with the terrorists. But Moran's job was not over yet.
A civilian reached me and told me that in the next street there are more terrorists. At this point I smiled. I said, okay, show me some pictures. I couldn't believe there were more terrorists.
Another family's house is taken by terrorists. Luckily, the terrorists were on the balcony, but inside the home, a mother, father, and their 2 children were hiding in a locked room with a kitchen knife. The district commander ordered Moran to go over there and take charge.
From what we know, there are 3 terrorists at the balcony of a second house. We hid here, and slowly we made our way, looking for the right house. My co-worker, Ro'i, signaled me. As you can see, the fence is high, and we had to think how to enter. We also don't know exactly where they are.
While the force led by Moran entered the house's balcony, the terrorists hid at the back inside a small structure. As she realizes the gravity of the situation, she makes a phone call.
I stopped to make a phone call to my kids. I told them to take care of themselves, that I love them, and that God is great. I just had that need.
Policemen started to surround the house, positioning themselves on the roofs of the neighboring homes.
The point was to flash out the terrorist location, since it was still quiet. I instructed one of the cops to shoot.
Before giving the order to shoot, they got the family out. Now the terrorists fired back and Moran was wounded, but she kept fighting.
My position was always here. I stood here with other officers. We were aiming our guns at the back room. After a long battle, an officer climbed the roof.
Where was he located?
He climbed here, and he was able to talk in Arabic with the last terrorist that was still alive. He finally surrendered.
Like Moran, many other women showed their bravery on October 7. Inbal Lieberman saved her entire village, Nir Am, when she understood the situation early on and gave as many guns as possible to the members of the kibbutz. Or Ben Yehuda, an officer in the IDF, gunned down 15 terrorists protecting and saving the people of Kibbutz Yated. But all of them prefer not to think of themselves as heroes.
I find it hard to take the credit. There are other cops, heroes, who left their homes and came to fight with no fear. I don't like the term hero. I find it awkward, the media and all that. But the reason I agreed to give an interview is to convey the next message. The Israeli police were at the front line. Policemen who came from their homes, who gave their lives, were killed or wounded. If it weren't for the police, we would have the same massacre we saw in the villages closer to the border. We have a strong police that is constantly under scrutiny.
Ariella, the owner of the house, asked not to be on camera, but she stops us to talk with Moran, sharing the memories of that day. She tells Moran her older child lives in the room at the back of the house. Later, he found a note in Arabic saying 9:45 and the address of a synagogue close by. Moran and her team saved many other Israelis since the terrorist plan was to shoot up the neighborhood synagogue that was packed with people praying, since it was the Sabbath and a holiday as well. They may not like to be called heroes, but Moran, Imbal, Or, and even Rachel are only few of the women who gave their all to save as many people as possible.
Well, the world of sport has been criticised for its handling of the war between Israel and Hamas, specifically the football world. After a week of silence following the October 7th massacre, some organisations, including the Premier League, released statements condemning civilian casualties on both sides. But more players have been speaking up. Leicester City player Hamza Choudhury was forced to apologise for a tweet in which he said, "From the river to the sea." as the FA warns players steer clear of this slogan, which does suggest that all of the Jews in Israel should be driven out of Israel. Well, Uri Levy is the founder of Babagol and a sports journalist. He's here with us now. Uri, we normally talk in happier times, don't we? But sport does play a role in all of this. Football have been doing a bit of a all lives matter on the issue, haven't they?
Yes, absolutely. Specifically English football, I would say. You know, after the October 7 massacre, many Jewish people and Israelis who are big fans of Premier League football, of English football, expected for some kind of, show of identification maybe from the league. Exactly like everywhere in the world, there were identifications with the earthquake in Morocco, with Ukraine, for example, but it didn't arrive, as you mentioned. It was more of a both sides, talk. But now, we've seen with the story of Hamza Choudhury in his tweet that the Premier League, the English FA is taking a very clear stance that this phrase that maybe before October 7 it has a very interesting meaning. Yes, now it's very clear. We're speaking about the annihilation of the state of Israel and the Jewish presence on this land, which means basically anti-Semitic message.
Which is another Holocaust.
Exactly. So I think that there is a moment of understanding. This is more than just Israel again bombs Gaza or whatever. There is a clash of civilization, there is a religious clash, and from October 7 everything changed. But as you mentioned as well, throughout the world of sports and football, with a big mass of Muslim supporters and Muslim crowds and Muslim footballers such as Mohamed Salah.
Exactly. Saudi Arabia is going
We've been talking about this for in the past 3 years, how Qatar and Saudi Arabia are changing the game. Now we're seeing also the impacts, the later impacts of this. Unfortunately, I'm a big preacher for convergence and peace through sports and for football specifically. This is what we're doing in Babagol, and I think this is what we're doing in this short segment of sports in Middle East now. But unfortunately, we're seeing a very sudden impacts on the game, on the way that Jewish people are perceived in the minds of the Arab world, the Muslim world, and unfortunately also some places in the West.
Yeah, well, I would say it's almost been worse in the West, in
Indeed,
like Paris.
Indeed, we are seeing really unfortunate scenarios from crowds also. Paris Saint-Germain fans with a Palestinian flag, Celtic fans that made a huge gesture with a full stadium of Palestinian flags, targeting the Jews, exactly with this phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which again, it's important to say, there is not a certain person that's saying he's against the Palestinian freedom, but this phrase now in the world of sports get the difference.
I challenge any Celtic fans to find Israel on a map. I'll leave it there. We're out of time, Uri. I'm really sorry. Uri Levy, thank you so much. And we'll bring the program to an end. Stay with us. Colette Ben-David is with you next.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
We see girls in their pajamas. We see elderly who were brutally killed. None of the bodies were purely killed. All of them had severe signs of abuse and severe signs of torture.
Je passe maintenant le micro.
This week, we were all moved when Private Ori Megidish returned to her family. We are deeply committed to doing everything in our power to bring those abducted home.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It is day 27 of Israel's war against Hamas, a day in which IDF Chief of Staff Herzl Halevi declared that Israeli forces have entered another significant stage in the war surrounding the Hamas stronghold of Gaza City and already even operating within it, fighting in its dense urban areas. Now, that effort is taking its toll, with Israeli casualties in this battle now reaching 20, and Palestinian fatalities, both terrorists and civilians, in the thousands. The violence also intensifying on other fronts. In the north, 2 residents of Kiryat Shmona are injured in a rocket attack as the IDF continues to exchange fire with Hezbollah forces across Israel's border with Lebanon. And in the northern West Bank, 1 Israeli heading home from his reserve military duty was killed when his car overturned after he was shot by terrorists. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Israel tomorrow as the Biden administration presses for a humanitarian pause in the fighting to allow more aid in for civilians. But War Cabinet member Benny Gantz says Israel will keep fighting until it frees all of the at least 242 hostages being held in Gaza.
Even at these moments, we activate all of the means in our possession in order to bring them back home. I say this to the people of Gaza themselves, to the civilians who understand the disaster that Hamas has brought on them. Those who will help return the hostages will be rewarded. Those who will hold on to hostages will pay with his life. Israel has paid enormous prices over the years. We continue to live on our sword.
And joining us in studio, we have Colonel Olivia Rafowitz, an IDF spokesperson for international media and a senior security and military consultant, and Guy Azriel, of course, senior editor here at I-24 News. And Olivia, if I could start with you, what can you tell us about the fighting going on there now in Gaza?
Good evening. It's a fierce fight, very fierce fight. We have, as you know, casualties since we started on Friday. And we continue to fight with armor forces, with infantry, and with also the Air Force. We have fought very seriously in the last days, and we killed 130 terrorists from Hamas and Islamic Jihad groups, which is actually very good achievement. But the mission is not over. We have to continue. And right now, according to what just said Herzi Halevi, the Chief of General Staff of the Israeli Army, forces are actually in, I would say, strategic places in the Gaza area.
Right. Right. And give us a sense of, you talked about the intensity of fighting in those urban areas. A sense of the progress. Of course, we can't give a timetable of that. But how fast, or for some people, it seems to be good. Well, there is a sense that it's moving faster than some people even thought it would at the beginning.
In such a kind of battlefield, when the Israeli army is fighting on a terrorist army like Hamas, very well equipped, well trained, with Iranian backing, we have to be according to our rhythm. We have to do what we want to do, not according to what the enemy would like us to do, where to move and what to look for, but according to a planning, very serious planning. And it means that sometimes we have to advance very carefully, very meticulously, in order to really engage the enemy where we have the intelligence, where we have the power of fire, and where we know that we are going to destroy the enemy. For example, if we talk about Jabalia strike 2 days ago and yesterday, there were strikes, very precise strikes against Hamas battalion leaders in the middle of the Jabalia camp, but not against just houses or facilities, but accordingly to intelligence against a specific place, which is the headquarters of Hamas command and control center, where we actually destroy it and we kill the responsible, Ibrahim Bayari, and other Hamas operatives. But just one point.
Well, I'll come back to you, Olivia, if I could, because I do want to jump to our correspondent, Jonathan Regev in South in Sderot. And Jonathan, down there, just not far from you, that fierce fighting going on. Just give us a sense of what you're hearing or even maybe seeing. And of course, rockets continue to fly into southern Israel.
Rockets continue to fly, that is true, but in far smaller numbers than they did in previous days. There were rockets to the city of Ashdod in the morning, and there also were rockets sent to central Israel in the afternoon. But if we look at the picture here in southern Israel, for the past 2 or 3 days, we see the numbers being much, much smaller. Even when rockets are fired to this area, they're fired that way further to the south, an area which the Israeli army has not entered yet. The area where we are in the city of Sderot, which is facing roughly the northern part of the Gaza Strip, the northern part of Gaza City, there's far less activity of rockets. It still happens, but not as much as in previous weeks. And inside the Gaza Strip, we're constantly hearing the artillery, and there's fierce battle inside. The forces inside are assisted by the artillery, which is still here outside the Gaza Strip in Israeli territory. And basically the aim, I think the Israeli aim now, is to cut the Gaza Strip into 2 parts. We're already pretty much seeing it happening. The forces that have entered a little bit to the south of where we are going deeper into the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is quite a narrow place, meaning that 5 or 6 miles into the Gaza Strip, that's all you need to cut it into 2. And this is one of the main forces of the main aims of the Israeli forces coming in just south of Gaza City, cutting Gaza City from the rest of the Gaza Strip, the southern Gaza Strip, along with the other forces that are coming from the northern part, basically encircling the entire city of Gaza.
All right. Jonathan Regev there in Sderot. Thank you for that. Guy, we got a sort of basic outline of the strategy IDF appears to be pursuing. Maybe we prepared a map. Give us a sense. Maybe you could show us some of the details on a map.
So just to get an idea of what we're looking at in terms of the IDF forces, the troops inside the Gaza Strip, we're talking about 3 main points where the IDF troops are stationed. The first is in the northern eastern part next to the town of Beit Hanun. Another one is in the northwest just by the coast next to Beit Lahia. And according to the information that we're getting, those 2 points have already connected, basically creating a continuity along the northern part of the Gaza Strip as they push south towards the area of Jabalia. That is, Kalev, one of the most densely populated areas in the Gaza Strip, a very complicated one for the IDF troops. very heavy presence of Hamas operatives obviously there. At the same time, IDF troops are also stationed in the center of the Gaza Strip, that is next to the Netzarim junction. Anyone that remembers all the settlements of Gush Katif, that is where one of the settlements was, and that is in the center of the Gaza Strip. The idea here is to separate the strip into two parts: the northern part, where much of the fighting is going on, and the southern part, where residents of Gaza have been instructed to seek shelter. So the IDF troops now are completing their mission of crossing this strip halfway and increasing the pressure on Hamas, closing off on Gaza City, encircling the city, the main hub of Hamas. And in just outside of Gaza City is the Shifa hospital. We'll see the next shot right here, that it is considered the main hub of Hamas in Gaza, just outside of Gaza City. And that is where, according to IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari, the main headquarters of Hamas are in, obviously in tunnels very deep inside the strip, underground. And this is where the IDF is looking to apply the pressure to get to the hospital and to clear that area of most of that Hamas activity.
All right. Olivia, I was to ask you, because we see Shifa Hospital, those who haven't been hearing the news know hospitals are key here, because not just in Shifa, but in other hospitals, including in Jabalia, which you mentioned, the Hamas has built its command centers, the central one in Shifa. We see some of the H's there, some other hospitals. And that is the challenge for the IDF, how to strike at those command centers, knowing that Hamas has loaded them up with human shields, with civilians as a kind of protective guard. That is the challenge for the IDF now.
First of all, I would like to comment about Jabalia strike again. You know, we have asked for weeks now the population of the northern part of Gaza to leave from the northern part to the southern part. Many of them, majority, have left, but Hamas continues to block and to prevent people to move from the northern part to the southern place. Now, for us, in spite of the fact that it's very difficult, we are going to continue our mission to strike and to kill the Hamas operatives and to destroy Hamas military capabilities. They will continue to find the way to use their own population as human shield. We're going to find the way to prevent as much as possible civilians to be involved. But I want just to be clear. When in a war situation, when the enemy is using so-called civilian facilities for war mission, this facility becomes a legitimate target. You cannot expect from the Israeli army to respect places where we are getting fire or attacks from them and say, because it's a civilian by definition, we're not going to strike them. Hamas knows it very well. The international law knows it also very well. We have to be very careful, but even though we will continue and we will destroy Hamas facilities, Hamas operatives, and also concerning Jabalia, the number of casualties, the number of people who have been killed, most of them were in the tunnel beneath the building where the command and control system.
Which is indicative that they were likely Hamas operatives.
Exactly. Now they are showing to the world bodies, and they are crying to the cameras. But we know very well that all of them are Hamas operatives or people connected to Hamas, because it's impossible in this situation, in this timing, to be there in this building, in this compound, without being accredited, or I would say accepted by Hamas people, because if no, they will kill you or will ask you just to leave. So if they are there, they are maybe connected to Hamas in some ways, and when you ask them to move or to leave and they decided to stay, or Hamas asked them to stay, that's the war. It is a war, again, Kelev, imposed on us by Hamas on the 7th of October. We did not look for this war. This war came to us, and now we have to fight, not only to fight, but when you go to war, there is one issue: to win the war. You don't go to war just because you want to go to war. You go to war because you want and you need to win the war, and will win this war.
All right. Though the issue of the civilian casualties will be challenging also on the diplomatic front. It is. We have Secretary Blinken coming tomorrow. We'll talk more about that later. But Israel, of course, also paying a steep price for the progress that it's making in Gaza with the deaths of at least 20 soldiers over the past 3 days. Now, one of those is 19-year-old Lior Simonovich. He's one of 8 soldiers from the Gavati Tzabar battalion who was killed when an anti-tank missile hit their armored personnel carrier. Simonovich was laid to rest today in his hometown of Herzliya. Here's what his mother Yafit and his father Yaron had to say at the funeral.
If only you were not in combat service, you would have been with us now. But that's what you wanted, and that's what's important, and we respected your decision. You fought like a hero in the war, and that shows your character. You're our hero, the hero of the Israeli people. You were and you will always be our pride. I love you so much. I miss you so much. I simply cannot believe it.
I will protect you. I will show them not to mess with us. This is what you've been doing until the battle has ended for you. Thank you, my champion, for 19 years of happiness you've given us.
And as I said, also the northern front heating up today. Let's go to our correspondent there, Pia Steckelbach. And Pia, we have some injuries there, civilian injuries, something that Israel has been trying to avoid. But today in Kiryat Shmona, that became a reality.
Right, Kalev, Kiryat Shmona, a city about 5 kilometers away from the Lebanese border that has been targeted with rockets for the second time this week. Hamas in southern Lebanon, the Al-Qassam brigades claiming responsibility for that barrage of rockets fired earlier today onto the city. Hamas saying it fired 12 rockets. 4 of them fell down, actually came down. One of them in the middle of the city there, causing a large fire. A 24-year-old man was delivered to hospital. He underwent a surgery. He's in moderate condition. Now he was injured by shrapnels, and the 41-year-old man is in serious condition after he suffered injuries from the burns he sustained there. But that is only one of the, in total, 3 times that red alert sirens were triggered here in the north earlier today, starting with border communities very close to the Lebanese border in the west, the middle, and the east side of the Lebanese border. Communities that are right behind Israeli military posts. And we do know that Hezbollah specifically has been firing anti-tank missiles and mortar shells towards these outposts. But of course, they also do majorly endanger these communities laying behind the mountain range that separates Israel from Lebanon and many parts here in the north. These communities have already widely been evacuated there. Then the second time alert was triggered in the Safed region, the Tzfat region, Kalev, about 20 kilometers away from the border there. And then the third barrage of rockets targeting the area of Kiryat Shmona, the municipality later issuing a message asking civilians there to remain inside their homes, close to their shelters. Kiryat Shmona, a city that has been evacuated, but of course, as it is the case with all of those evacuated communities, there are always people who want to remain in their homes. As Kalev, as of now, it is not clear when they will be able to return. And of course, also people, especially those who work in agriculture, say that they cannot leave their work there in their home communities. Of course, these tensions there, that provocation coming a day ahead of that very much anticipated speech that is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon by Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader. He's supposed to speak tomorrow for the first time since the war began, after Hassan Nasrallah and also the other Iranian proxies there present in southern Lebanon have continuously repeated, emphasizing their solidarity for the Palestinian cause, that the ground invasion, that the ground operation that Israel is currently conducting in Gaza is a red line. In case that will be crossed, they would force everyone into action. These are the words that we have heard throughout this war, all over, also from Hezbollah and also from the Iranian regimes there. So this speech tomorrow that has been announced already at the beginning of the week, keeping the tensions high in terms of what Hassan Nasrallah will have to say, is very much expected that tomorrow we will all have to listen to that and see whether Hezbollah will say anything in terms of trying to escalate their front, turning that frontier into a full-scale war. As of now, we see these skirmishes intensify. However, they do remain to be contained. The IDF is, of course, as per protocol, always striking back to the origin of that fire there in southern Lebanon, Kalev.
Pia Steckelbach, right, northern Israel by the Lebanese border. Thank you for that, Colonel Rafwitz. Let's talk about the northern border, Hezbollah. Today, something that Israel had been trying to avoid in the north, civilian casualties from that fire. We have that speech by Nasrallah. What is going to be the red line for the IDF? I know it wants to try to contain that conflict on the north, not to pull its forces and attention from the south, but there must be a kind of red line where Hezbollah might go too far and will require a stronger response.
As you know, the priority for Israel is the war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and that's the number one priority. Now, the north is escalating, and the issue is what the Lebanese people and what Lebanese government can do in order to stop or to prevent Hezbollah to bring Lebanon in this war, which is actually not his war. We are not in war with Lebanon. We are in a war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and right now Hezbollah is playing a very dangerous game, because on one way we see that they are hesitating, actually trying to push or to help Palestinian groups along the border against Israel. Today they maybe went to further limit, but still they are not actually crossing, I would say, the extreme red line, and we can assume that it was maybe done because tomorrow Nasrallah is speaking, and maybe they wanted to reinforce, to strengthen what Nasrallah will say tomorrow, like he did something, but he is not ready to go further because the risk is very high. Today, the chief of the army, General Herzi Halevi, just said that the Israeli Air Force, is ready with bomb and the airplanes to go to any target that we need to go, and the allusion was very clear. If Hezbollah is crossing a line that for us is impossible to accept, the price for Lebanon and for Hezbollah will be very, very, very high.
Right. I just want to say another factor could have been the visit we have Rear Admiral Daniel Hagar, the IDF spokesperson, about to speak. Let's take a listen.
השלימו את כיתור העיר עזה, מוקד של ארגון הטרור חמאס.
The hub of terror group Hamas. Over the past few hours, armored vehicles, together with many fighter jets, are targeting terror infrastructure being used by the leadership of Hamas and its terrorists. Engineering forces are locating threats on the ground and dismantling them in order to allow the forces to move freely around the area. They're taking down terrorists. The hand of the IDF is on top. We operate all the time, from on the ground, air, and sea. When we need to, we move back and operate a heavy fire and continue with our forces. This continues itself from fight to fight. The commanders lead the fights with bravery, together with the fighters moving ahead. This is the spirit of the fighting, and this is the way the IDF is operating, with its full force against Hamas. But we must not be mistaken. If we need to understand who's involved in the war, we can also see Ismail Haniyeh, one of the heads of Hamas, is going to visit Iran today, and the welcome that he is getting from the leaders of Iran, that means that Iran is pushing the proxies, the Houthis, and Hezbollah and the others in order to divert us from our focus on Hamas. We are focused on Hamas. We are focused on eliminating Hamas and making a main effort to bring back our hostages. As for Haniyeh, while he's flying in private jets, he will sacrifice Gaza like Yahya Sinwar. This is what they're all about, sacrificing Gaza for their personal survival. In the north, the IDF has struck with fighter jets a number of targets of Hezbollah in Lebanese territory: infrastructures, headquarters, launch sites, and a number of other targets in response to the rocket fire earlier today on the Lebanese border towards Israeli territory. In the north, the IDF will respond with actions, not with words. With actions and not with words. We are in high readiness. In the West Bank, the IDF, together with the Shin Bet, continue to fight Palestinian terror and arresting dozens of terror operatives every night. With war terror attacks over the past few weeks, Israeli Air Force jets continue to operate with offense and defense on various arenas simultaneously. Dozens of jets are flying all over the Middle East at any given time. Our enemies are seeing the Israeli Air Force and our abilities to operate with precision. They understand the meaning of that. The Air Force, together with the intelligence, are covering for our troops on the ground as well, in Gaza, in north, and also in the West Bank. The aerial defense system with the Navy continue the defense effort on the people of Israel in all the arenas and on all the borders. Today, the Chief of Staff visited the Air Force Base and said the IDF is ready to any development in any arena. The Air Force is operating with less than half of its capacity and is ready to operate at any arena in very short time for anything that is needed. So far, we have given notices to families of 242 kidnapped families and to 335 families of our fallen IDF soldiers. Our hearts are with the families. We'll continue to be with them at these very difficult moments. We will also be with the wounded and will wish them recovery together with their families. Those who fell in battle has given an important help to the security of the State of Israel, with the spirit of fighting and in the compass that it gives to all the fighters that are now fighting in Gaza and in the north. What drives them is those who fell in battle. For them, we will continue to fight until we win. Over the next several weeks, we will need to show resilience and patience. Questions? Is a ceasefire of several hours is possible? The term of ceasefire is not on the table. The IDF is engaged in war to dismantle Hamas. Are we expecting an escalation during Nasrallah's speech? We will react with actions and not with words. We are in high readiness for any challenge. We will operate with actions. The shooting attack in the West Bank.
All right, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagar, the IDF spokesperson there, giving his daily briefing. Guy, what struck me especially was the emphasis on the northern front, the warning, I would say clear warning to Hezbollah following this rocket attack on Kiryat Shmona, in which two Israeli civilians were injured, and maybe anticipating ahead of this Nasrallah speech tomorrow, making clear to Hezbollah that if they should escalate their involvement in this fighting in the north, they will pay a heavy price for it.
There's certainly an uptick in the escalation in the north just this evening, with a barrage of rockets that have reached many cities, including Kiryat Shmona, with Israeli injuries. Before that, we saw strikes on IDF posts. So certainly the threat there, the risk in the north is very evident. The IDF is well aware of that. All eyes are on Nasrallah, and we also need to remind our viewers that at the same time that Nasrallah will make his speech, well, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is going to be here in Israel. So that's also something for Nasrallah to think about.
That's one thing to think about, and you're right. And of course, that Sixth Fleet is staying there off the coast. That's definitely a factor there that he has to consider. It's clear that Daniel Hagari not wanting to give too many details about the fighting in Gaza. Israel,
as did Olivier right here.
As noted. The IDF being very vague about what's happening on the ground there. Clearly, they want to keep Hamas off guard. We could speculate in the studio here, but of course, we don't have the up-to-date information. When we say this is where the IDF is, that's based on foreign press sources. We should emphasize that that map we showed is based on foreign press sources. I don't know if it's the most up-to-date, but clearly they want to try. The IDF wants to keep the fog of war, keep Hamas off balance.
Well, obviously, Hamas has a lot of surprises for the IDF, and the IDF on its part also wants to surprise Hamas as much as it can with applying that pressure, creating more opportunities, opportunities for the IDF, and also collecting intelligence about over 240 Israelis who are kidnapped underground there in Gaza. That is, we need to remember at the same time that the IDF is fighting Hamas, it is also looking for opportunities to rescue those Israelis. We saw that one sole Israeli soldier that was rescued, Ori Megiddish, just a few days ago, and what impact that had on the national morale of Israel. Obviously, that is something that Israel and the IDF in general would like to see a lot more of, and that is the complexity as well of this fighting, as the IDF fights with full force against Hamas while also wanting to ensure the safety of as many of these Israeli hostages at the same time. A very complicated task.
When we're speaking of the hostages, of course, there are across the country different memorials that have been set up, reminders of those hostages, everything from posters to more elaborate exhibitions. One of them is in Tel Aviv, at the Tel Aviv Museum. Let's go to our Batya Leventhal, who's there outside the Tel Aviv Museum. What's really started to be called that plaza in front of the Tel Aviv Museum, now people are calling it the plaza of the hostages, Batya.
Absolutely, Kalev. And we've actually just taken a walk down the road from where that seems to be the area that the hostages' families have set up base camp in terms of having live presses there and having vigils and memorials, as you mentioned. Right now, as you can see behind me, there is another demonstration, another exhibition called Empty Beds, and we'll show you that in just a second. But you can see just behind me, there is a giant screen telling the audience exactly how long: 26 days, 13 hours, 7 minutes. And you can see on the end that number going up, 55, 56, that is the number of seconds. So again, we've been in the war for 27 days, but some of the hostages that have been taken, over 240, have not seen their families for 26 days. Now, the exhibition that I want to show you is as follows. So I want to take a look at some of the visuals here. These are empty beds that have been set up. As you can see right now, we're looking at a crib, and the majority of them have been left the way that some of the beds in the south in particular have been left, or at least seen from the IDF generals that have walked there, some of the kibbutzim that were ravaged. You can see on this other bed here, they've left glasses and a book. And this is just two in a line of these beds. You'll see now on the camera, this just goes on. And this specific one is at Habima Square. So again, another famous landmark in Tel Aviv that sees so many people coming to have a look at such a demonstration. They are very much putting this up along with the hostages, with the argument of there are more than 240 hostages. They need to be brought home today, not tomorrow, and not when this war ends immediately. Civilians should not be casualties in war. This is not, again, we're not talking about military officials or soldiers. We're talking about young children. We're talking about the elderly, women, just men that have nothing to do with the military at this point, or are past the age of even doing reserves. And so the families have set this up in conjunction with a lot of the artists. And what's amazing as well about these exhibitions is once they are finished, there was a similar one just yesterday in Jerusalem, also in a main square, showcasing at that point 239 hostages. Today we know that number is over 240. All the sheets, all the materials that have been used will be donated to those in the south that have had to evacuate and flee toward the center of the country, as the south is still undergoing A, renovations, and B, is still clearing
carrying out possible infiltrations, and the fighting goes on across the border in Gaza.
All right, Batya Leventhal, very moving to see those empty beds, those cribs especially. Batya Leventhal in Tel Aviv, thank you for that. Now, in the wake of the October 7th terror attack and the scope of the atrocities committed there, some Western nations are finally taking steps long advocated by Israel to rein in and outlaw the activities of Hamas and its supporters within their own borders. We're talking about fundraising and various political activities. Well, today, Germany announced a series of steps in that direction. Here's that country's interior minister announcing those measures today.
As Federal Minister of the Interior, I am today banning the activities of Hamas and Semedin in Germany and dissolving Semedin Germany. Semedin is an international network that spreads anti-Israel and anti-Jewish propaganda under the guise of a so-called solidarity organization for prisoners in various countries. Semedin also supports and glorifies various foreign terrorist organizations, especially Hamas. Holding spontaneous celebrations here in Germany in response to the terrible terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel, as we are witnessing in Berlin, is unbearable. This shows Semedin's anti-Semitic, inhumane worldview in a disgusting way.
Well, for more, let's go to Berlin and speak with Israel's ambassador to Germany, Ron Prosor. And Mr. Ambassador, thanks you for joining us. Well, tell us about these measures. Something, as I said before, Israel has long advocated different Western states to take, and how it came to the point that Germany finally is making these steps.
So first and foremost, I have to say that Germany decided to move from words to deeds. And, from the start, from the go, the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, said the only side one can really be on is on Israel's side. And they went out to a working plan, including, banning Samidun and Hamas, also controlling the finances and the money that went directly from different institutions and NGOs over to Hamas. And the Germans really, I think, understood one thing, that Samidun is basically a Trojan horse for the German democracy. They're using and abusing it. And the scenes on the streets of Berlin, where they're shouting, death to Jews, death to Israel. And that, I think, woke Germans up and said, hey, just a second, 2023, we have Molotov's cocktail flying over on synagogues. We have David stars, painted on Jewish houses. What the hell is going on here? And they moved to really say, hey, if we don't act against these guys now, we'll cry tomorrow.
Right. You mentioned that firebombing of that synagogue in Berlin, which really harkens back, I have to say, to the 1930s. And the Interior Minister actually did address the issue of anti-Semitism in Germany. Give us a sense of what you're seeing there and feeling there in Germany as we're seeing these kind of scenes, cemeteries being defaced. And, of course, you mentioned these rallies, even mass rallies, where you hear these kind of definitely incitement against Israel and Jews.
Absolutely. And look, on the streets of Germany, Jews are afraid to run around with kippahs. Israelis speak on the phone in English and not in Hebrew when they go underground. And the fact that Jews fear to run in the streets of Germany because of this violence basically gets the Germans to wake up. And by the way, a last poll 2 days ago said that 60% of the Germans are afraid from the new immigration and what they're, introducing into Germany with violence. So it connects in the fact by saying, hey, it's not enough that you have a German passport or that you just enter Germany. We have not maintained a common denominator. These guys are coming to Germany knowing nothing about democracy, democratic values, or any of the values that we grow up in. And if we don't deal with this today, they're going to turn Berlin or a place called Neukölln into Gaza. And I think you see the fear of Germany of understanding, on the Jewish, Jews here in Germany, and the anti-Semitism that comes with the immigrants, and calling a spade, and not trying to look away. So don't belittle this. Germany, with the whole idea of the constitution after the Second World War, with privacy laws, is coming out big and saying, hey, freedom of expression is fine, but this is freedom of incitement? Absolutely not.
Right.
It has to stop.
Well, you have Germany, you have in the UK, the British government also taking some measures. How much do you think this could serve as a model for some of those other countries in Western Europe or elsewhere in Europe in general, where we see Hamas, or as you mentioned, these cover organizations that also dress themselves as Palestinian charities to actually raise money? Other governments could be inspired maybe to take similar measures.
Absolutely. I think Germany is the first to really move on this in a, actual, doing something, deeds. And I just want to remind you all our viewers, that it took Europe, years to basically put the political arm of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, because they made a differentiation between the military arm and the political arm. Hassan Nasrallah didn't know that there was a difference. But in Europe, they still made that difference. It took them years to basically put everyone on the terrorist list. So I think Germany is starting today a journey that I think most European countries should follow, because at the end of the day, we're really making a differentiation between, civilization and barbarism, and Hamas and their likes should really be banned anywhere in Europe. And it's better that they do it, today, so they don't cry tomorrow.
All right, yeah, don't cry tomorrow. Ambassador Ron Prosor there in Berlin. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you.
And Guy, I want to get back to you on the hostages. Just before we went to, because that is the key here, and we should not forget that for a moment. And we just saw that very moving exhibit there at the Habima Square just before we went to the ambassador.
Yeah, so two interesting developments with regards to the hostages. Well, the psychological warfare of Hamas continues, as this evening, Hamas sending text messages, SMS messages to the families of those poor hostages.
Right, using the phones taken, of course, from the hostages.
As well, but they also have their intelligence, having the numbers, the phone numbers of those families, trying to apply pressure on them, saying to them that we have offered Israel a prisoner exchange deal, and asking them to apply pressure on the Israeli government to give in to that deal, together with a link that obviously they should not click on. And just over an hour ago, Minister Benny Gantz making a statement to the nation saying that Israel will provide immunity to those Gazans who will provide information about the safety, about the well-being, and help release some of the captives. He's promising immunity to those Gazans and their families if they assist in releasing the Israeli kidnapped.
Right, well, we'll see if it bears any fruit, though we may not even know, in fact, if it does.
It's an effort.
Yeah. Well, among the most outspoken of Israeli political figures during the past month on the Israel-Hamas war is a former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. Now, he himself is a veteran of an elite combat unit. Bennett today visited the city of Nahariya, just south of the Lebanon border, and he spoke there with I-24 News about the Northern Front and, of course, the battle raging in Gaza. Here is some of that.
I don't want to give advice to the government. It's regardless of my opinions, it's the Israeli government, and I stand behind its actions. I think Hezbollah should take into account that the degree of destruction that they will bring upon Lebanon if they start up with us will be immense. And Nasrallah previously said about the Second Lebanon War, which I participated in, that had he known of the Israeli reaction, he would not have initiated it. So I suggest he recall his own statement. I think a lot depends on seeing the process actually in the south all the way through. The government has set an objective of eradicating Hamas. We need to do that. We need the government and Israel to deliver on that very solid promise. I think that will reflect not only to the communities around Gaza and in the Negev, but also to the communities here. And in fact, it'll resonate, and it's being watched by all of the region. So Israel has to deliver on the very clear promises it's made. First and foremost, before we talk about who replaces them, all Hamasnik terrorists are either dead or expelled to foreign countries. That's what it means. Because if you still have Hamasniks, then you've not eradicated Hamas. As for who will come instead, as long as we understand the principle guiding us that we're not willing to have an armed Gaza anymore, there's several options, and all of them are reasonable. I think, after you clean it up from security problems and from terror, you can hold elections. There's other options you can effect there. I don't think that we should be showing any divisions within Israel, certainly not within the government at a time of war. That's why I back the government and I back, of course, the security forces. We need to wake up and see that we're in a new environment, a new world, that we can't ignore any more harsh realities. The harsh reality is that the Palestinian Authority sends every month pay for slay money, which is effectively rewarding terrorists who murdered Israelis. And that in itself is a major incentive. I think it's vital that Israel insists that there's no more pay to slay money, and only then can continue discussing the bigger question.
Naftali Bennett, and if you've been watching international media over the past few weeks, you know he's been quite effective and outspoken in those interviews. Now, we mentioned earlier the 20 IDF soldiers so far killed in the Gaza fighting. The most senior among them is Lieutenant Colonel Salman Habaka of the Armored Corps' 53rd Battalion. Now, Habaka, from the Jewish community of Yanujat in northern Israel, was already a hero of this fight because on October 7th, he headed directly south to the Gaza border and he drove his tank into Kibbutz Be'eri as part of the rescue effort here. Here's Habaka describing that exploit to Channel 12 News prior, of course, to his falling in battle in Gaza.
We take out the first tanks to the south of the Gaza envelope. I position myself so that I'm deployed from Kerem Shalom to Erez and Sderot crossing. When I entered the settlement of Be'eri, with my tanks I see a force of infantry who says to me, "Salman, they are slaughtering us and bodies are lying on the street. We stand next to your tank and fight with you." I had 2 tanks in the Kisufim area and they actually killed terrorists who tried to infiltrate the Kisufim army post. There were 3 tanks at the Erez crossing that basically took the Erez crossing back from the Hamas terrorists. The advantage of the tanks is its lethality and its power. The 53rd Battalion is meant to lead to victory. The battalion understands that they have no other country.
Salman Habaka, one of the many in the Jewish community who serve in key combat positions in the Israeli Defense Forces, fallen in the line of duty. May his memory be a blessing. Now, on October 7th, there were other stories to emerge of exceptional courage under fire. And those also must be told. When the small town of Ofakim came under attack that day, Hamas terrorists seized 2 houses there and took the families inside as hostages. Now, one woman on the scene was in charge of the battle to free them. That was the Israel Police Staff Officer Moran Teji. Reporter Mor Ellen has her remarkable story of courage.
The October 7th massacre could have been a greater tragedy, if not for the men as well as the women who put their lives on the line. One of them is Moran, a mother of 2, from the small town of Ofakim, 15 miles from the Gaza Strip.
On Saturday morning, we were awakened by a missile alert. We understood that this is a serious situation. In my district, people are getting hurt. A mother and her son were killed. I turned on the police radio and heard things I hadn't heard in over 20 years.
Moran, a staff officer in the Israeli police, was hearing her co-workers battling the terrorists that entered Israel, many of them targeting the Nova festival being held just by the Gaza border. She rushed to the closest battle location. It was all of 250 yards from her home. Police were already there, but she took command.
I ran inside. I see cops here and there. What we know at this point is that we were dealing with 4 terrorists. Later, we caught 5. They barricaded themselves into a house with hostages.
This house of another hero, Rachel and her husband David, were held hostage for 20 hours. While the police and the terrorists were battling outside, Rachel kept feeding the terrorists cookies and drinks, trying to steal time until the police could burst in. Under fire, Moran tried to find shelter while moving forward to the battle area.
We were under heavy fire. They were shooting at us from the direction of the house. A hand grenade is thrown at us, but thank God it didn't explode. We hid behind the garbage, which gave us some kind of a shelter. And we start shooting at them. 2 policemen were wounded, and we extracted them under fire. We understood that we needed to call the special units.
At this point, the district commander arrived. Moran updated him on the situation. They decided to stabilize the situation until additional forces would arrive to negotiate with the terrorists. But Moran's job was not over yet.
A civilian reached me and told me that in the next street there are more terrorists. At this point I smiled. I said, okay, show me some pictures. I couldn't believe there were more terrorists.
Another family's house is taken by terrorists. Luckily, the terrorists were on the balcony. But inside the home, a mother, father, and their 2 children were hiding in a locked room with a kitchen knife. The district commander ordered Moran to go over there and take charge.
From what we know, there are 3 terrorists at the balcony of a second house. We hid here, and slowly we made our way, looking for the right house. My co-worker, Ro'i, signaled me. As you can see, the fence is high, and we had to think how to enter. We also don't know exactly where they are.
While the force led by Moran entered the house's balcony, the terrorists hid at the back inside a small structure. As she realizes the gravity of the situation, she makes a phone call.
I stopped to make a phone call to my kids. I told them to take care of themselves, that I love them, and that God is great. I just had that need.
Policemen started to surround the house, positioning themselves on the roofs of the neighboring homes.
The point was to flash out the terrorist location, since it was still quiet. I instructed one of the cops to shoot.
Before giving the order to shoot, they got the family out. Now the terrorists fired back and Moran was wounded, but she kept fighting.
My position was always here. I stood here with other officers. We were aiming our guns at the back room. After a long battle, an officer climbed the roof.
Where was he located?
He climbed here, and he was able to talk in Arabic with the last terrorist that was still alive. He finally surrendered.
Like Moran, many other women showed their bravery on October 7th. Inbal Lieberman saved her entire village, Nir Am, when she understood the situation early on and gave as many guns as possible to the members of the kibbutz. Or Ben Yehuda, an officer in the IDF, gunned down 15 terrorists protecting and saving the people of Kibbutz Yated. But all of them prefer not to think of themselves as heroes.
I find it hard to take the credit. There are other cops, heroes, who left their homes and came to fight with no fear. I don't like the term hero. I find it awkward, the media and all that. But the reason I agreed to give an interview is to convey the next message. The Israeli police were at the front line. Policemen who came from their homes, who gave their lives, were killed or wounded. If it weren't for the police, we would have the same massacre we saw in the villages closer to the border. We have a strong police that is constantly under scrutiny.
Ariella, the owner of the house, asked not to be on camera. but she stops us to talk with Moran, sharing the memories of that day. She tells Moran her older child lives in the room at the back of the house. Later, he found a note in Arabic saying 945 and the address of a synagogue close by. Moran and her team saved many other Israelis since the terrorist plan was to shoot up the neighborhood synagogue that was packed with people praying, since it was the Sabbath and a holiday as well. They may not like to be called heroes, but Moran, Imbal, Or, and even Rachel are only few of the women who gave their all to save as many people as possible.
Moran Tej, one of many women who on October 7th distinguished themselves in combat roles. There is a bit of an update out of Washington relevant to some of the issues we've been discussing. John Kirby, the spokesperson for the National Security Council of the White House, was asked about the so-called humanitarian pause. Kirby said, what we are talking about are temporary, localized pauses in the fighting to meet a certain goal or goals. Of course, I think we heard from today from the IDF spokesperson, the IDF response to that.
Right, so I guess he gave the answer even before the question was even asked. Daniel Hagari saying, as we translated right here in studio, that the term of ceasefire is not even on the table, as the IDF is obviously so engaged in this fighting right now, even encircling the city of Gaza, as putting up the maximum pressure on Hamas right now. This is not something that Israel wants to do at this moment of time. We also are hearing from Secretary Blinken that is making his way into Israel right now, and he's telling reporters that in his meeting with Israeli officials tomorrow, he will discuss ways to minimize the number of civilian casualties in Gaza. Just goes together with what we heard from John Kirby. And on the side of all of that, the question of fuel to Gaza, and particularly to Israeli hospitals. Well,
to the hospitals in Gaza.
Correct. So earlier today, we heard the IDF chief, Herzi Halevi, speaking to reporters, and he was asked about the possibility of Israel allowing fuel into Gaza. His response was, well, for many days we're hearing that the hospitals will run out of fuel. They haven't so far, but if they will, we will deliver fuel to the hospitals, but make sure that they do not reach the hands of Hamas. That is a very difficult promise to give. I don't see a way in which the IDF provides fuel to the hospitals and that doesn't reach Hamas. We all know very well how Hamas uses the civilian infrastructures, including fuel, for its own military purposes.
All right, for sure. And of course, we know also that Hamas itself has these stored fuel to keep maintaining
perhaps
its
for months.
Underground facilities. Estimations are for months. Guys, you'll stay with us. We are going out for a break, but we are going to continue into a second hour on this special broadcast. Stay with us. We'll be back at the top of the hour with lots more of our coverage. Be right back.
Surprise, the transition to parenthood can be transformative for anyone with a new baby. But what kind of mark is it leaving on the brains of new parents?
There are dramatic physiological, hormonal, and neuronal changes in the body and the brain that accompanies parenthood.
Much like the changes that happen in the brain when picking up any new skill, like learning a new language or mastering a new musical instrument, the brain also changes when becoming a parent. It's what scientists call experience-induced brain plasticity. And Professor Adi Mizrahi is doing some of his own digging into this at the Hebrew University's Edmund and Lily Safra Center for Brain Sciences.
In a region of the brain called the amygdala, it becomes more sensitive in the mothers when they hear baby sounds.
In short, all these senses get a boost to help a mother interact with her baby. Smell and sound, two very strong stimuli, are the areas Professor Mizrahi is focused on in his lab. But does fatherhood have the same impact on the brain and bodies of men?
Levels of testosterone, which is the male hormone, which is correlated with male-like behaviors like aggressiveness and things of that sort. It goes down when the male becomes parents.
As Professor Mizrahi says, each and every one of us has a parent or two parents. And most of us will become parents one day. And as any new parent knows, having a baby provides opportunities for enrichment, learning, and stress experiences known to transform the adult brain.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
This week, we were all moved when Private Ori Megidish returned to her family. We are deeply committed to doing everything in our power to bring those abducted home.
Welcome to or back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. It's day 27 of Israel's war against Hamas, a day in which the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzl Halevi, declared that Israeli forces have entered another significant stage in the war surrounding the Hamas stronghold of Gaza City and already even operating within it, beginning to fight in its dense urban areas. Now, that effort takes its toll, with Israeli casualties in Gaza now reaching 20, and Palestinian fatalities, both terrorists and civilians, said by them to be in the thousands. The violence also intensifying on other fronts. In the north, 2 residents of Kiryat Shmona are injured in a rocket attack as the IDF continues to exchange fire with Hezbollah forces across Israel's border with Lebanon. And in the northern West Bank, one Israeli heading home from his military reserve duty was killed when his car overturned after he was shot by terrorists. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is on his way to Israel, arrives tomorrow, as the Biden administration presses for a humanitarian pause in the fighting to allow more aid in for civilians. Well, joining us in the studio, we have Ambassador Danny Ayalon, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Deputy Foreign Minister and Member of Parliament, and, of course, our correspondent, Guy Azriel. And, Guy, maybe we could call up the map that we've made And we do have sirens. I'm just going to just announce we do have sirens going off in the city of Ashdod. So another round of rocket fire. Guy, let's take a look in the meanwhile at the map.
Yes, as the sirens ring in the south of Israel, let's take a look at the intense fighting that is going on right now in the Gaza Strip, starting in the northeastern part of Gaza. That's where IDF troops are stationed in Beit Hanun. Another group of IDF forces are in the western part next to Beit Lahia, and we know that these troops have already created continuity as they push south towards the area of Jabalia. Now, Kalev, that is one of the most densely populated areas in the Gaza Strip, making it very difficult for those IDF troops as they make their way into that area. Obviously, Hamas has many surprises for them, including explosives and other means, while the Israeli Air Force is also assisting in clearing out that area. At the same time, we have IDF forces down in the center of the Gaza Strip next to the Netzarim junction. They have basically now closed off towards the coast. That is about 6 miles here. Also, in this case, pushing northbound towards Gaza City, upping the pressure on those Hamas operatives in the city of Gaza. That is really a very important part of that ground offensive. And when we speak about Gaza City, let's speak about Shifa Hospital. That is something that the IDF has its eyes on, because IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari revealed just a week ago what sort of infrastructure the Hamas terror group holds under that hospital. Thousands of kilometers of tunnels of the Hamas group under that hospital, including the main headquarters of Hamas, the main areas from which Hamas operates, sends its rockets, and delivers the orders to its operatives. And that will be the next task of the IDF, and obviously a very complicated and sensitive one, considering the fact that this is a big hospital in Gaza.
Absolutely, and that is going to be a very tricky operation for the IDF on many levels. Now, as we said earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is now en route to Israel, arriving tomorrow for meetings with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other officials here. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden's response to the war for Israel so far has been fairly much a best-case scenario, with the echoes of the U.S. president's speeches in those first weeks still reverberating in the Israeli mind. But as our senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman explains, Biden's tone has changed a bit in the past week, even if his positions haven't yet.
For Joe Biden, the war has turned more complicated. Gone are the early days of emotive speeches from the U.S. president connecting with the Israeli experience. And here now is a more cautious style of looking at the war over in the Middle East.
We're going to continue to affirm that Israel has the right to responsibility to defend its citizens from terror, and it needs to do so in a manner that is consistent with international and humanitarian law that prioritizes the protection of citizens.
In principle, Biden's positions are consistent. From the start, he has supported Israel's full-on fight against Hamas. From the start, he has worried about protecting civilians. Notably, he has not wrapped those two together. He has wanted to achieve both. But Biden must confront the pictures and the politics, where his approval rating has dropped 11 percentage points among Democrats, presumably because of the war.
The number of trucks entering Gaza continues to increase significantly, but we still have a long way to go. The United States is going to continue to drive humanitarian support for innocent people in Gaza who need help, and they do need help.
By November 2024, of course, the political impact of the war could diminish. Many news cycles will have passed. The presumed candidacy of Donald Trump will focus minds on the left. But Biden, for all his Zionist ardor, for all his commitment to building and boosting U.S. allies around the world, does need to manage the politics. That means changing the tone. And for civilians in Gaza, bringing results.
Well, Well, for more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim in New York. Mike, Secretary Blinken on the way here. Israel and the U.S. or their government still pretty much on the same page about the end goal here for Israel, eliminating Hamas, freeing its hostages. But some differences emerging in the journey to that end goal. For example, this issue of so-called humanitarian pauses, or as we used to call them, temporary ceasefires. Clearly, Israel is still not on board with that idea.
Not quite yet, and we've seen a gradual change here in the Biden administration from absolutely no stoppage in the fighting, let Israel take care of its business, to we're exploring the possibility of the benefits of a humanitarian pause, to now, hey, let's have a humanitarian timeout here. Now, National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby just a little while ago was asked to define exactly what the U.S. means in terms of a humanitarian pause that they're calling for now. He said we're talking about temporary, localized pauses to meet a certain goal or goals. Very legalese speak there, but it just goes to show you that there's really fine-tuning and polishing in the message here coming out of the U.S. exactly what they are looking for here, so as to not hamstring Israel any more than it needs to be hamstrung in terms of its carrying out its mission here. So the details still being worked out, but it's clear there's a change of direction here from the Biden administration as the civilian tolls mount in Gaza in terms of letting more aid in terms of making sure that civilians can get out, especially American civilians. We've had, as Biden announced earlier today, 74 American citizens, along with their family members and foreign nationals, were able to get out of Gaza so far. So definitely a change in direction here. And Israel, I think, is starting to work its way toward Biden on that as well, though not quite as fast as the Biden admin would like.
Right. Another issue certainly come up. Biden administration has been vocal, expressing its concerns about activity by some segments of the settler community in the West Bank. Saying the Israeli government has to rein in the more extremist element there. A situation that was aggravated certainly today by the terrorist shooting of an Israeli resident of the West Bank. And that's certainly going to be another one of the points that are likely to be raised by Secretary Blinken.
No doubt whatsoever. If you recall, Kalev, you and I a couple months ago were talking about this on a daily basis of how much the State Department was focusing on that particular issue of violence coming out of the Jewish communities there in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, against Palestinians living in those areas. This was a daily criticism coming out of the State Department, oftentimes in very stark terms. We've gotten away from that, obviously, due to more urgent circumstances that have taken over, but it's not as if it's been forgotten here. And obviously, when you look at Hamas's influence there in Palestinian territories within the West Bank, it can light a fire quickly, and Israel will be dealing with conflicts, harsh conflicts on both sides of its borders here. The United States urging Israel to get at least that border under control.
Right. And finally, Mike, we should note the Secretary Blinken will go on to Jordan after being in Israel, maybe other Arab capitals. We don't know yet. Maybe trying to push Israel to start that discussion about what we call the day after. What happens after Hamas is defeated?
Yeah, there's been talk within the State Department here about trying to move Israel forward on a day after plan. There have been some suggestions floated so far as to an international peacekeeping force that may or may not involve the Americans, possibly the United Nations taking over on a temporary basis, which is an absolute non-starter for Israel. Doesn't matter who's running the government for Israel at that point in time. There's also been a kind of a novel suggestion floated out there that maybe the Abraham Accords countries or other Gulf countries that have an interest there can not just whip out their pocketbooks as they do every now and again and write a check, but actually share in some form or fashion temporary governance over Gaza. Now, Tony Blinken, testifying in front of Congress the other day, said that he would like to eventually, as part of a Palestinian state, see a revamped and revitalized Palestinian Authority take over. Listen to the state of the Palestinian Authority right now, and with Mahmoud Abbas nearing his end, either health-wise or politically-wise, there's no telling what the Palestinian Authority is going to look like soon, but it's certainly not going to be revitalized anytime soon. So no real good answers at this point in time, but it certainly helps to think think about what the day after might look like, rather than finding yourself in that position without any good answers.
Right. In fact, there's a debate going on even today in the Israeli government about withholding tax funds from the Palestinian Authority. The government is split on that, so certainly that also seems to be a little problematic, at least for this current government, to move ahead in extending its authority into Gaza. Mike Wagenheim, thank you for that. Yeah. Ambassador Ayalon, so a lot of issues that Tony Blinken is going to be bringing up with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Like I said, on the big picture, on the same page, but on the details, differences emerging.
Yes. So if we talk about the context of his coming here, it's almost symmetrical with the upcoming, very much expected, important, quote-unquote, speech of Nasrallah tomorrow.
Also, yes.
So it's very important, I think, for the Americans to have here a very high-level official here in the region, whether he'll be here or in Jordan, when Nasrallah makes the speech, in case Nasrallah will make some, let's say, extreme moves, including with not just threats, but more action on the ground. Then there is a decision maker here from Washington that can respond very quickly.
Right, including, let's keep in mind, with that, the U.S. Sixth Fleet right off the coast of Lebanon.
Absolutely, absolutely. The Sixth Fleet in the coast of Lebanon, and the Fifth Fleet, it's in the Arabia, in the Gulf. So this is the first thing. Also, we have to, not interestingly, but he brings with him, actually, the new American ambassador, Jack Lew.
Yeah.
And Jack, first of all, to bring him up to speed of what's happening here, and also let him start, hit the ground running, because he won't have any grace period. And the administration need to have here a senior ambassador who has the access in Washington, who can be also in a decision-making position, and also who would have the respect of the Israeli government.
Right.
With all due respect, I mean, she's doing a great job, the Chargé d'Affaires.
Stephanie Hallett.
Yeah, but you need somebody with the gravitas and with the authority.
Right.
So I think this is also was very important for them to bring Jack Lew as soon as possible. And then, of course, when he's here in a regional tour, they have to think about the day after.
Right.
And here I think they are a little bit unfair to the Israeli government, which is so much now immersed in winning the Gaza war. There are some teams talking about the day after, but I think there will be time to discuss it.
All right. Stay with us, Danny. I want to go back to the issue of the hostages. On the morning of October 7th, Renana Gomez was visiting away from her home on Kibbutz Nir Oz next to the Gaza border when she received a phone call from her house where her two sons, 16-year-old Or and 12-year-old Yagil Yaakov, were sleeping. What followed was a mother's worst nightmare, and one that now has been depicted in a short film created by cooperation between Renana and animator Yoni Goodman, who also worked on the acclaimed film Waltz with Bashir. Here's that clip explaining what happened next.
On Saturday morning, October 7th, at 6:30 in the morning, the red alert went off, and a barrage of missiles fell on our house in Kibbutz Nir Oz. My sons, 12 and 16, were alone in my house sleeping. They got into the safe room. They called me, scared to death. They said they hear someone breaking into our home. Over the phone, I heard voices speaking in Arabic. Even though my son was trying hard to hold it closed, the door to the safe room was pushed open. Last I heard was my youngest saying, "Don't take me, I'm too young." 70 people were kidnapped from their home in Nir Oz. I think of them, alone, in a pit or a dark tunnel, with no sense of time. I hope that they are together, keeping each other strong, and that they are with other children who were also kidnapped. Until I see them again, waiting to hug them again soon.
And joining us now is Renana Gomez, the mother of Yigal and Or. Thank you for joining us. Renana, that little short clip, very moving, it gives us the facts, but just give us what went on in your mind and in your heart on that morning when you had that phone call and you started to realize what was happening.
Actually, it doesn't just give the facts. It's
it gives, I think, well, it was meant to give, and I think it did quite a good job in it, giving the way I felt and still feel in regard to those horrifying moments. As you said, it's every mother's parent, but certainly mother's nightmare.
Sure.
And this nightmare just became my reality. And I had this dream, the nightmare, and it was all in the colors of Wars with Bashir. And I went to look for Yoni because I wanted it out of my head. And he did a great job in getting it out. And he gave it a good ending. And I certainly hope this will be the ending eventually.
Right. What did you decide? Now, of course, I've spoken over the past few weeks with many of the people who are family members, each of them in their own way, trying to raise the profile, both locally and even internationally, of the plight of their loved ones, their family members. I'm just curious how did it come about that you chose this method?
As I said, I woke up just a few mornings after it all began, and I had a nightmare that was all in the colors and the animation that was like Wars with Bashir, and I just decided that I'm going to look for Ari Foreman and Yoni, and I'm going to get it out in the open. I thought it was a good way to show the world what happened and the way how I feel, the way it made me feel in real time. And it's not as graphic as everything else was. I wanted it to be something that people can relate to without having to watch the horrors, because
sure,
there was so much of it going on. It's just you couldn't watch it anymore. It's so horrifying, and I think this is a way to get to people and to show the horror and to show the fear. They were scared to death, and so was I, and I still am, to be honest.
Sure, of course.
It was a good way to show it without being too graphic.
What kind of reaction? Can I ask what kind of reactions you've gotten to it, or have it been out there long enough for you to get reaction?
This went viral way more than I expected, way more than I could ever think of. It went throughout the world. I get reactions from anywhere and everywhere. People said it made them cry. People said it made them realize what was really happening. People said they could relate to it and finally could understand how it feels to be in that situation. All sorts of different reactions. Also, we've got some negative responses as well, but this is part of being viral. You don't always get good reactions. And I do believe that if we got some bad reactions, it means it actually gets to the right ears as well.
Sure.
Not just to those
right
who think alike.
Now, yeah, and all of the people I've interviewed, I want to ask them, you have a forum here, whatever you might have to say, either, of course, to the local authorities or government here, but as you know, we are an international channel, played all over the world, in the region as well. And I wonder, in your own voice now, what message you might have for those in the international community as well, about the situation, not only of your own children, but of course all of the hostages.
I would just want the world to enlist to the effort of releasing them as soon as possible. Mainly children. There are 32 children from the age of 9 months to the age of 17 that were taken from their homes. Just imagine it was your child taken from your home, from their own bedroom, in your house, taken, dragged into a tunnel somewhere, thrown into the darkness. Children should not be imprisoned and certainly should not be kidnapped and held hostages for almost a month now. And they are not bargain chips in a war game. They're not part of this. And this is not a war. It was a terror attack, a horrific terror attack. Children are shot, murdered, burned, tortured, and And what I want the world to do is to enlist to the effort of releasing all of the hostages, but certainly 32 children are held somewhere in the Gaza Strip by a terror organization, and who knows what conditions they're held in and how they're being taken care of and whether they're even alive.
Oh, yeah. Renana, it's hard to anyone to imagine what you're experiencing. Of course, our deepest sympathy and support for you. And of course, but most of all, our wishes for the safe return of your two boys, Yagil and Or Yaakov. May they come home safe and sound. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with us on
Thank you for having me.
News.
Thank you so much.
Just heartbreaking to hear those stories.
Absolutely devastating. Some of these kids are high school friends of my nephews.
No.
In these kibbutzes, in Sha'ar Negev, in these communities. It breaks your heart. I cannot even start to imagine how it feels like for the parents, but even for their friends, they do not yet know the full extent of what has transpired. These are young kids, and even their friends are unable to be given that information about what has happened to their friends. And even if they hear just that sentence of a friend of mine from school has been hijacked, they have no idea, and I don't want them to have an idea of what this reality means like for them. It's heartbreaking. I hope the world sees and understands what's going on.
I want to ask you about that. The world sees and understands, because as we discussed, and we've been discussing the show, Israel is now pressing into Gaza. There are civilian casualties. Some of the tide of public opinion that was with Israel is starting to waver a bit. And the answer to that is, the question is, how much of that is offset by the message still coming out that there are still these hostages, these young children, babies, elderly people being held in Gaza, and this mission at the cost of civilian casualties in Gaza ought to rescue those people.
I think it's important to just keep driving this point home to the hearts and minds of these people around the world. Some of them are brainwashed either by the Muslims, or they're afraid of them, but it doesn't matter. We have to do what we have to do, and I think what Israel is also very well advised to do is to really hunt down those perpetrators of the pogrom, of the massacre of the 7th of October, as they did the Nazis. Nothing less than that. I think that would be a very important lesson for history, for not only just to keep the records for history, but also justice has to be meted to all those guys. And I know Israel is actually taking very meticulously all the details of everyone who participated in the massacre, from the very lowly guys on the ground all the way to Yihya Sinwar and Muhammad Def and Hania, and all of them are accountable. All of them have to meet their justice one way or another.
An effort that may time. We do have to keep in mind some of these people are not even in Gaza. Hamas has some of its leadership outside in other countries in the region.
There was a very important initiative today by two former chiefs of the Supreme Court in Israel, Aaron Barak and Dorit Beinish, to really build the case for the criminal court of International Criminal
ICC,
Court,
yeah,
to bring them all to record everything, and what Israel said to those Hamas guys: either unconditional surrender or you die. And if there's unconditional surrender, then there have to be a follow-up like the Nuremberg trials to them.
All right, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, Guy Azriel, stay with us. We are going out for a brief break, just a few minutes, but stay with us as we continue our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war here on I-24 News. We will be right back.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News, Day 27 of Israel's war against Hamas. But as we said, there was also a intensification of the fire across the Lebanon border in the north of Israel between the IDF and Hezbollah forces. 2 civilians, Israeli civilians, injured in the town of Kiryat Shmona by fire from Lebanon. Tomorrow, expected the first major speech by Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, since this conflict began. Now, behind Hezbollah is, of course, Iran. And yesterday, the commander of the Tehran regime's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force arrived in Lebanon to coordinate with the Shiite militia there amid these continued border clashes. The big question now is whether the Iranian-backed terror group will escalate its conflict with Israel. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran takes a closer look.
For 27 days now, the main focus of the IDF has been the threat from Gaza. But Israel's northern frontier against Hezbollah continues to occupy IDF forces with daily exchanges of fire and the attempted downing of an IDF drone early Thursday morning.
In the north, we continue to attack Hezbollah targets along the border and eliminate enemy squads that try to launch anti-tank missiles, rockets and mortar bombs toward Israeli territory. IDF forces also in the last hour attacked positions from which rocket launchers were fired in the direction of Mount Dov, Mount Hermon and other directions.
Following the IDF strike, Hezbollah announced the death of another fighter among its ranks, the 50th since the beginning of the war. The real number is likely higher. Most of Hezbollah's casualties are the result of airstrikes on its anti-tank units, which have been attacking IDF outposts along the Israel-Lebanon border. Some of them eliminated before they could fire their missiles, although that's not how Hezbollah sees it.
We have seen over 3 weeks of Israeli attacks and strikes carried out by the resistance against Israeli military outposts. The Israeli enemy hasn't managed to mark a single achievement despite all of its advanced technology, attack drones, artillery, and daily airstrikes on our hills and villages. None of this has brought a single achievement.
Ahead of a much-anticipated speech on Friday by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, his first since the start of the war, Iran's IRGC Quds Force commander Ismail Qaani is visiting Lebanon. This is Qaani's second visit to Lebanon since October 7th to coordinate with Hezbollah concerning the conflict with Israel. Nasrallah's speech should also shed light whether Hezbollah will raise the threshold of the border clashes to a full-scale war or not.
Now, the tensions caused by the Israel-Hamas and potentially Israel-Hezbollah conflicts go far beyond even the region. While the U.S. and Europe continue to support Israel's fight against Hamas within certain limitations, which we've discussed, Russia has taken the opposite tack in basically leading the international coalition against Israel's campaign. Here's Russia's ambassador to the UN speaking to the General Assembly on that.
All the US can do is talk about Israel's right to self-defense, although, as an occupying power, it has no such right, as confirmed by the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice in 2004. I hope that this blatant double standard is clear to our colleagues in the Global South. As for Israel's security, the right for which we recognise, it can be fully guaranteed only in the event of a fair solution to the Palestinian problem on the basis of a well-known UN Security Council resolution. We do not deny Israel the right to fight terrorism, but fight terrorism, not with civilians. Otherwise, you yourself take the side of evil and act using its own methods.
Danny, the irony or outright hypocrisy of Russia attacking Israel as an occupying power and saying, basically that obviates its right to self-defense. I mean, it's almost, it would be comical if it wasn't so serious.
Absolutely. And, we know how Putin and Russia deals with what they call terrorists. They flattened a whole city with millions of people, Grozny in Chechnya, about 2 decades ago. Their unprovoked attack on the Ukraine and what they do in the Ukraines, including all this deportation of kids and families. I mean, these are real war crimes that are perpetrated by Russia, and they have the temerity to call us out. I don't think it's serious. I don't think anyone takes them serious. But unfortunately, Russia has put themselves at the head of the axis of evil today with Iran and all the proxies of Iran, like Hezbollah.
And even countries like North Korea, which is supplied weapons that has somehow ended up in Gaza,
and
in the hands of Hamas.
We see from the Wall Street Journal this evening that the Wagner Group may supply air defense missiles to Hezbollah.
Well, that would be a red. If they do that, I would strongly recommend the Israeli government to start supplying the Ukraine military with a lot of equipment that we have that could really maybe shift the balance over there and let the Russians understand that it's a two-way street. Until recently, we have been kind of walking on eggshells because we were trying to be deferential to them, if you will, in our operations in Syria.
And a concern over the Jews of Russia as well.
And of course, concern of the Russian Jews. But I would say right now, I don't think the Russians have the wherewithal to really stop us do our self-defense actions in Syria.
Right.
And we don't need their permission for that. And for the Russian Jews, I think that they would be well advised not to even bring this issue into the equation, because they are Russian citizens, and if there is anything done to Russian Jews, then it's going to be very serious.
And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but if Hezbollah should get involved, that might draw Iranian involvement, and that would draw Russia in deeper. So this has potential for much more serious international consequences, but let's just leave it at that for now. But let's stay in the international arena in the meantime. Irwin Cutler is the former Justice Minister of Canada. He's a renowned human rights lawyer. He's also Canada's outgoing special envoy on Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. For decades now, he's been at the forefront of international advocacy against the demonization of Israel, and now, of course, speaking out against the atrocities committed against Israelis on October 7th and for the return of its hostages held by Hamas. Joining us now is a former Canadian Justice Minister, former Attorney General of Canada, Irwin Cutler. Irwin, thank you for joining us. Just seeing you there, I recall you had a quite well-known formulation that criticism of Israel veers into anti-Semitism when Israel is treated as the collective Jew among the nations. And I really think you could see what happened internationally since October 7th as a really profound illustration of that.
Well, one would have thought that given the mass atrocities, horrors too terrible to be believed, but not too terrible to have happened, targeting Jews by not only a terrorist organization, but an anti-Semitic genocidal terrorist organization, which is what Hamas is, not because I say so, but because they have affirmed it since 1988 in their founding charter. One would have thought that this would have resulted in a combating of anti-Semitism. Regrettably, it's resulted in intensification, almost an explosion of anti-Semitism, which just lets us know the extent to which this is not only the oldest, longest, most lethal, and most toxic of hatreds, but it always singles out the Jew, the Jewish people, Israel as the Jew among the nations, as the enemy of all that is good and the embodiment of all that is evil at any given moment in time.
Right. Now, of course, Oren, you've dealt with the issue of human rights and international law for many, many, many years. The irony is here we have the situation of the hostages being held by Hamas, violating all of those, pretty much every statute, and yet again we have Israel now facing charges or accusations of violations of international rights in its campaign to rescue those hostages.
Well, the thing is that the question of the unconditional and immediate rescue of those hostages has to be a standalone obligation. It is a humanitarian imperative of the first order. We're talking about toddlers, children, women, elderly, Holocaust survivors being held by this terrorist organization. It has to be a moral imperative of the first order. The principle of humanity is a foundational principle of international human rights law. What we are witnessing is the worst of inhumanity. It's a legal imperative. Every day that these hostages are being kept in forced disappearance and detention is a standing crime under international law, a standing war crime and crime against humanity. And finally, it's an international legal obligation. This has to be the first priority of states in the international community. That is to secure the immediate release of those hostages. Any other attempt to deflect or deny is not only playing politics, but is evading states' responsibilities under international law to make this an independent, standalone priority. As I said, a compelling humanitarian, moral, legal, international imperative.
Right, and you have said, and I've read that Canada should be at the forefront of that. We have to say Prime Minister Trudeau has spoken up about it and has given support for Israel. There are Canadian citizens or those who held it among the hostages, but how Canada acts in international forums like the UN is something a little different. For example, that amendment, that sort of one-sided amendment, which Canada abstained on and was criticized in some quarters, I believe also including by your daughter, who I should mention, Michelle Cutler-Wunsch, a guest on the show, who is Israel's official envoy against combating anti-Semitism. What do you have to say about how Canada is dealing with this current situation?
Well, I met 2 days ago with the Prime Minister and the leaders of all the other parties in Parliament, and I said what we needed at this point was a multilateral coalition, the same way that we had a multilateral coalition re-ISIS. We need a multilateral coalition now for the immediate rescue of the hostages. That's number one. Number two, at the UN, I met yesterday evening with our Canadian ambassador to the UN, Bob Ray, and discussed with him putting in place an ambassadorial partnership in action, getting the ambassadors of the various countries whose nationals are now being held hostage, bringing them together, making this a priority as well. So I'm hoping that that initiative will take place. The third thing is we've set up now an all-party, non-partisan parliamentary group to advocate for the release of the hostages, and we're internationalizing that effort to cut across parliaments in the community of democracies. and we seek to sanction those like Iran who are training, arming, funding, supporting, celebrating Hamas, Qatar and Turkey, who themselves have become enablers and have provided base and sanctuary for Hamas. In a word, we have a 10-point action plan. I've shared it with the Prime Minister and political leaders in Canada, last week with American congressmen and senators and the people in the administration, and with civil society in Canada and elsewhere. So what we hope to have is, number one, a whole of government priority with regard to the release of the hostages. Number two, a whole of parliament commitment and a civil society involvement. This has to be, as I said, a standalone priority of the first order.
Well, hopefully that will be the case, hopefully, and that will lead that kind of international pressure will.
And if it doesn't, we'll call them out if they don't act.
All right. Well, hopefully that. All right. Well, hopefully though that. Well, hopefully it won't be necessary. I am fearful that it may well be necessary, but I'm sure you will be among the loudest calling them out. Erwin Cutler, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Good speaking with you.
Well, I want to move now back to the Middle East. Following Egypt's lead earlier this week in agreeing to allow entry through the Rafah crossing for a number of wounded Palestinians from Gaza in order to receive medical treatment, the United Arab Emirates announced today that it planned to treat some 1,000 Palestinian children from Gaza, though without specifying how they would actually exit the Gaza Strip and perhaps make it to the Gulf. Well, for more, let's go to the Gulf and speak to our Dubai correspondent, Bastian Burry. And Bastian, let's talk about that. What exactly the UAE means or intends to do by this announcement?
I agree with you, Caleb. Tonight there are more questions than certainties regarding what was announced today by the Emirati authorities. The official communique states that Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the president of the UAE, has directed the provision of all kinds of medical and healthcare for, as you said, 1,000 injured Palestinian children from the Gaza Strip at the country's hospitals until they recover and return. Fine, but we don't know how they would leave the enclave for the Gulf state. As we all know, Israel has tightened its blockade over Gaza. The only exit point, apart from the closed border crossings with Israel, namely Egypt, has largely been shut since October 7, although, as you said, several hundred foreign nationals and a very small number of injured Palestinians have crossed into Egypt since yesterday to be treated in Egyptian hospitals. We know that Qatar brokered that deal to allow some people to leave Gaza, with more than 6,000 or 7,000 foreign passport holders being allowed to get out over the course of about 2 weeks. But it's not clear whether those children and their families, let's not forget about them, would be able to leave Gaza under the specific deal, which, by the way, involved Israel and the United States as well. No one from the Emirati authorities and from the Israeli diplomatic mission here answered requests for clarification.
All right, Bastian Burry there. Hopefully we will get some clarification, Bastian Burry there in Dubai. Thank you for that. And Danny, I have to give you some credit, because quite early on you were saying that inevitably some Palestinians will likely, civilians will have to start coming through that Rafah crossing that at the beginning Egypt was adamant saying it's going to stay closed, no Palestinians coming through. They then started to allow the foreign nationals to come out, then the treatment, the taking in Palestinians, and now we hear the Gulf. Yeah. And I suspect whether the mechanics of it, this is we're going to be seeing more of this thing, more of the coming through that crossing, at least temporarily, perhaps in Sinai or elsewhere, especially in the wake of Secretary Blinken's visit here.
Oh, absolutely. And when we think about the day after, I mean, there is no question that Gaza is co-owned by Egypt and also the Arab world. It's not just Israel's problem.
Even though Egypt adamantly denies it publicly.
Yeah, but you know, actually, Gaza was under Egyptian rule for more than 20 years, until 1967, where nobody was thinking about creating a Palestinian state in Gaza.
Right.
The PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, was created in 1964. What was there to liberate? Us here in Israel proper. So there's no doubt that some kind of a new regime will have to be established in Gaza, and you cannot do it effectively without the Arab League. The money should come from the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, and administration and security, or at least some kind of cooperation between Israel and Egypt on security would have also to be established in Gaza, at least as an interim, before you bring a Palestinian Authority or anything else that would be able or would have the wherewithal to govern Gaza in a peaceful way.
Right. Yes,
we are hearing that Blinken is discussing that issue of who would govern Gaza together with some of his counterparts in the region, speaking of some sort of multinational force. And just going back to the idea of treating Palestinian patients, well, one of the ideas that was floated today was the idea that some European nations would bring floating hospitals to the coasts of Gaza. Germany was one of those names mentioned, and perhaps France as well, bringing some of their boats to the coasts of Gaza and treating patients, Gazan patients wounded from that war on their ships. It could be an interesting, creative solution for patients that do need immediate help, and when these hospitals like Shifa are being used by Hamas.
Well, the big issue is if Hamas would allow those patients to leave instead of using them, as we know, as basically human cannon fodder there, human shields. Guy Azriel, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, thank you for joining us on this broadcast. Now, all kinds of assistance is being used to treat the wounded, both the physical and the emotionally wounded, from the October 7th terror massacre. That also includes some welcome assistance from man's and woman's best friend, of course, the canine species, in the form of therapy dogs. That story is told in this report adapted from Channel 12 News.
This time, they decided to enter to the sounds of classical music. Every day, for 2 weeks, they've been coming to Soroka Hospital. They're therapy dogs that have undergone long training and have come especially to help the wounded in the war.
Hi, Dennis.
Hello.
Hello, Dennis.
Hello.
Simba, up.
Yay.
As we work on rehabilitation, try as much as you can to work on stretching the hand.
Okay.
And caressing. Let's try to expand the motor ability. Try to work with both hands and improve your reach.
Come.
Good. Sit down. Sit down, and now give it to him.
Dennis was wounded while trying to neutralize the terrorists with his personal weapon.
You didn't feel the pain when he puts his hand on you?
Yes.
Despite its size. He is very, very careful.
Because he now stepped on both my feet, basically to put them here.
But you don't feel the pain at all?
No.
Not feeling? That's the uniqueness when you have a dog next to you.
Yes, simply amazing. Days and nights in the hospital are very difficult. And such an atmosphere of hugs and that, it does something good.
Yes.
And connects.
Hi, how are you?
I think it allowed us to do a process of processing trauma with patients who had a very, very hard time talking. We had a patient very seriously injured who was in the middle of an anxiety attack, and the introduction of the therapy dog allowed him for a moment, to open up to the world and talk about the pain, talk about his pain.
And through the treatment of the dog, through his ability to regain control even for a moment in his life, it really allowed him to talk about the injury as well, to tell about the painful places as well.
I heard an alarm in Beersheba. I got dressed, put on a uniform, went to Sderot. A total of 24 terrorists were inside the Sderot police station. I got shot in the chest and leg. They managed to pull me back to one of the shelters.
Mati Tsarfati fought for long hours against terrorists at the Sderot station. He was seriously injured, was sedated and ventilated. Now he's in the middle of a particularly long rehabilitation process.
With a hand up over her nose, then she sits. She will reach out. Beautiful.
All of a sudden, the dog moves his hand, knows the movement. There are certain movements that I'm allowed to perform with my hand, and it's even desirable that I perform them with my hand and with the dog. This is very helpful.
Come on, Alpha. Let's go to Daniel. Hey, Daniel.
What's going on?
We came to work together. Alpha, this is Daniel. Daniel, let's try to work with the hand. With the injured hand, we'll try to slowly increase the range.
I divided the force into two. Some fought inside, some fought outside. I was outside.
Daniel Demari was wounded by a gunshot while fighting terrorists at Netivot Junction. From there, he continued with his team, where he got shot again, almost everywhere on his body.
In this hand, I received a bullet that entered my bone. And it came out a little above the elbow and caused a fracture.
Come, Alpha. Nice, Daniel. Excellent, excellent. Come on. Nice, Alpha. Nice. Excellent, Daniel.
Not everyone is suited to dog therapy. And you know what? Sometimes the dog therapy is not necessarily with the patient, but with his family members. And we will gain something else along the way. Sometimes the dog therapy will be with the department staff, exhausted from long days of caring for the wounded, and the dogs will be a respite for the staff, and through this we will get help for the patients.
What fun you are having.
An experience.
Nice. How are you? How are you getting on?
Yes, they came in the morning, were in the room with me, and that's it.
Yeah, it calms you down. When it directs your inner forces, come on to rehabilitation.
Yes.
To reach the abilities you had, and maybe even beyond that.
The connection between humans and dogs has proven itself since the dawn of humanity. And perhaps the great success here can continue to other hospitals as well, and make it even a little easier for those who are at one of the most complex and difficult points in their lives.
There is a feeling, a good feeling, like really, because a dog is the most simple creature. It loves the deepest, it is reliable, and the most genuine. It's a little different in real life.
Fortunately, I think a lot of those therapy dogs will be needed in the months ahead. Now, we mentioned earlier this memorial, or I should say this exhibition relating to the hostages that was at the Habima Square this evening. Another one, 3,000 red balloons and pictures of the hostages kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th were placed on the seats of the auditorium at the Jerusalem Convention Center today. Rabbi Leo D., whose wife and two daughters were killed by Palestinian terrorists in the West Bank earlier this year, participated in this initiative and had this to say.
I'm Rabbi Leo D. I lost my wife and two daughters in a terror attack to Hamas terrorists in April 2023. And I'm here in the International Conference Center in Jerusalem, where we host presidents and we host pop concerts and happy events and launches of new Israeli technology. And we're demanding that we bring the hostages home. We have 1,400 murdered on the 7th of October, 250 hostages still in Gaza. And we are demanding that the world march through the streets of New York and Paris and London, say no to terror, say bring our people home.
Bring them home now. I don't think much more needs to be said than those four words. Thank you for joining us on this special broadcast on I-24 News, but stay with us for our continuing coverage of Israel's war against Hamas as Day 27 moves to a close. Thank you.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Einfach mal sitzen bleiben! Mano!
Sí, están desviando, enderécela para allá, pero ella tiene que...
This is Breaking News Edition. I'm Benita Levine coming to you live from Tel Aviv. Intense fighting deep inside the Gaza Strip on day 27 of the war. Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says the military has unique solutions to demolish the vast Hamas terror tunnel network. Confirmation that 19 Israeli soldiers have been killed in recent days as the IDF works to eliminate Hamas, the terror group behind the killing rampage in southern Israel on the 7th of October, in which more than 1,400 people were shot, tortured, and butchered. Now, there are currently 242 known hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza, and the military is still investigating, so that number could be far higher. More than 32 hostages are children. So far, 4 hostages have been released, mother and daughter Judith and Natalie Ranan, and 2 elderly women, Yocheved Lifshitz and Nurit Cooper. And 1 hostage has been rescued. Private Ori Megidish was reunited with her family at the start of this week. Joyous scenes on that day. Now, rocket sirens sounding just a short while ago in Ashdod and other parts of the south. Also earlier, rocket sirens sounding in northern Israel, including in Rosh Ayin and Sfat, close to the border with Lebanon. Sirens earlier in the day in parts of central Israel, including communities close to Ben Gurion Airport. Tomorrow, U.S. Secretary Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Tel Aviv, and later on Friday, Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah is expected to make a public address out of Lebanon amidst much speculation around his next moves. The IDF saying a short while ago Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who lives in Qatar, is due to visit Iran in his private jet. Israel's Defense Force also saying the term ceasefire is not at all on the table at the moment. And so we now speak to our studio panel. For more, we welcome Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, former military secretary to 3 ministers of defense and former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF, political commentator Daniel Sheck, former Israeli ambassador to France, and our senior editor, Guy Azrael. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for being here. We start with you, Guy, and the latest updates, the developments on the ground. Gaza City is surrounded right now.
Yes, first start with rocket fire. The last barrage of rockets fired toward the city of Ashdod just an hour ago. No casualties in that strike. We saw a barrage of rockets both in the north and in the south this evening. At least 12 rockets fired towards the northern communities in Israel. Hits recorded in Kiryat Shmona, with several Israelis wounded there, and another barrage of rockets from Gaza. At the same time, the IDF continues its ground operation in the Gaza Strip, operating from several fronts surrounding Gaza City, as was confirmed by the IDF this evening, both from the north in the areas of Bet Lahia and Bet Hanun, but also from the central area of the Gaza Strip, closing in on Gaza City. And we are seeing live images out of Gaza right now. Some flares up in the air. Well, obviously some part of the ongoing ground operation there. The troops are on the ground. Obviously very intense fighting going on, and we're getting more reports on these right now. Obviously IDF forces are facing very fierce battles in very tight areas where Hamas operatives are stationed in very narrow streets, sometimes very densely populated areas, and that is what is going on right now in Gaza, as you can see on the screens.
Those were live images on our screens right now out of Gaza. More updates to come, but first let's find out what's been happening up north. Our correspondent Pierre Steckelbach is in northern Israel, close to the border with Lebanon, and filed this report.
The northern front continues to heat up. This evening, red alerts were triggered 3 times in different areas here in northern Israel, starting with 3 locations right behind the border in the west, middle, and east of the border. Communities there were targeted with anti-tank missiles and mortar shells. Hezbollah taking responsibility for firing towards the eastern and disputed region of Har Dov. A little later, sirens sounded in the area of Safed, and 10 more communities in that area, about 20 kilometers away from the border. And then the city of Kiryat Shmona was targeted. Hamas in southern Lebanon claiming responsibility for launching 12 rockets, as they said, as quote, a response to the massacres in Gaza. 4 of those rockets fell in open area. 1 came down in the city and caused a huge fire, injuring 2, a 24-year-old man suffering from shrapnel injuries. He was admitted to the operation room in the hospital in Safed, and another 41-year-old man suffering from burns, and he is in serious condition now. Kiryat Shmona has been evacuated just last week. A house was set on fire earlier this week, but also another direct rocket impact. Today again shows how the Israeli measures to evacuate these border communities proved to be effective. The situation in the north is very volatile, and the Israeli military has been striking back towards the origin of those launches in southern Lebanon. But these new provocations come ahead of the speech of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah that is scheduled for tomorrow at 3 p.m. And it will be the first time that Hassan Nasrallah speaks since the beginning of the war. But whether he's going to escalate the situation further, or if these relatively contained skirmishes continue, remains to be seen. But tonight, Hezbollah and Hamas in southern Lebanon have again showcased their presence and some of their potential. This is Pia Steckelbach from the north of Israel for I-24 News.
Meanwhile, Lebanese media is reporting that the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, Ismail Qani, is visiting Beirut to coordinate with Hezbollah. It comes amidst those continued border clashes between IDF and Hezbollah forces, and the question remains, will the Iranian-backed terror group escalate its conflict with Israel? Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has more in this report.
For 27 days now, the main focus of the IDF has been the threat from Gaza. But Israel's northern frontier against Hezbollah continues to occupy IDF forces with daily exchanges of fire and the attempted downing of an IDF drone early Thursday morning.
In the north, we continue to attack Hezbollah targets along the border and eliminate enemy squads that try launch anti-tank missiles, rockets and mortar bombs toward Israeli territory. IDF forces also in the last hour attacked positions from which rocket launchers were fired in the direction of Mount Dov, Mount Hermon and other directions.
Following the IDF strike, Hezbollah announced the death of another fighter among its ranks, the 50th since the beginning of the war. The real number is likely higher. Most of Hezbollah's casualties are the result of airstrikes on its anti-tank units, which have been attacking IDF outposts along the Israel-Lebanon border. Some of them eliminated before they could fire their missiles, although that's not how Hezbollah sees it.
We have seen over 3 weeks of Israeli attacks and strikes carried out by the resistance against Israeli military outposts. The Israeli enemy hasn't managed to mark a single achievement despite all of its advanced technology, attack drones, artillery, and daily airstrikes on our hills and villages. None of this has brought a single achievement.
Ahead of a much-anticipated speech on Friday by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, his first since the start of the war, Iran's IRGC Quds Force commander Ismail Qani is visiting Lebanon. This is Qani's second visit to Lebanon since October 7th to coordinate with Hezbollah concerning the conflict with Israel. Nasrallah's speech should also shed light whether Hezbollah will raise the threshold of the border clashes to a full-scale war or not.
So, as we take a deeper look at security developments on all fronts, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, your take, Eitan, on what is happening right now. We saw live images moments ago out of what is happening inside the Gaza Strip. We know it's coming at a cost. Already 19 Israeli soldiers have been killed in recent days. These are live images on our screen right now. Your take on what is happening right now.
First of all, the achievement of the Israeli Defense Forces is the fact that we made it very fast, averagely, in surrounding the Gaza city. And as you are surrounding it and moving inside, it means that the clashes inside are much more complicated. We are much more inside a urbanic area, while it gives the Hamas people opportunities coming from the underground tunnels or making kind of an ambushes and other kind of thing. We saw the beginning of it from 24 hours ago, and it's increasing the opportunities to be attacked. So what we see now, it will be a picture that we will see, I estimate, in the coming nights as well, because this shows you how it's very close. They are sending thousands of terrorists in one attack towards some of vehicles or infantry people coming from directions that are coming from the underground tunnels that are not seen by the forces, and trying to go inside to the vehicles or the armors or the tents and put charges on them, and it brings face-to-face fighting. And you hear about brave stories about the IDF soldiers which succeed in seconds to stop it, or to be, in the few cases, unfortunately, injured or worse from it. So that shows you how we are coming more and more deep, close, and continue with this kind of operation.
Daniel, I want to bring you in, because as we look at these live images, and they are very dramatic images on our screens right now across in Gaza. The IDF saying earlier it has an obligation to return home all the hostages. So inside Gaza are, as you well know, because you are intricately involved with the families who are waiting for news, not only more than 240 known hostages, but more than 30 of them are children.
Right. Well, that is a priority, and I think the Israeli public feels that way. There have been polls showing a shift from a few weeks ago when the polls showed that the first priority was eliminating Hamas. A week ago, it was returning the safe return of the hostages. The Forum of the Families that I'm involved in obviously has only this on its agenda. It's a single issue organization. Clearly, the government has other things on their plate. There's a war to fight. There's an economy to run. There are many considerations. But the families do expect that the safe return of their loved ones is top of the agenda of everyone, of the politicians, of the army leadership, etc.
Certainly the whole heart of the nation focused on those hostages and waiting for some kind of good news.
Of course, because, you know, the term hostages is a little bit cold. You must imagine 242 human beings from the age of 9 months to the age of 87. These are terrible demographics to describe this term of hostages, with medical problems, mental health problems, family problems, terrible distress, and we don't even know how many of them have been injured during the capture, how many are alive. There is nothing. There is information only about the 5 people who are freed, plus a couple more whose videos were released by Hamas. That is all. All the rest is speculation.
Certainly something we will be following up on, but I want to bring in to the conversation Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserve, Sarit Zahavi, founder and president of the Alma Research and Education Center, joining us from the Western Galilee. Thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about security concerns on all fronts at the same time. And of course, as you well know, rocket sirens sounding in parts of the Galilee earlier, close to the border between Israel and Lebanon, in Kiryat Shmona, in Sfat, Manara as well. These alerts coming as the IDF was saying it was striking Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon in response to earlier rocket attacks. So what update can you tell us? What are you seeing and hearing from where you are right now?
Right now it's quiet, though we do hear more retaliations of the IDF here. I want to emphasize this is not exchange of fire. What is actually happening is that Hezbollah carried out a strike of small drones against IDF positions and mortars and missiles that were launched. As you saw, there was one hit in Kiryat Shmona. The feeling is that it was a busy day, an intense day, even comparing to the previous days that we had. Maybe kind of a build-up before Nasrallah's speech tomorrow. Part of, by the way, a whole campaign that we've seen in Lebanon as well to build up for this speech tomorrow. You know, I must say that I feel that it will be difficult for Nasrallah to back from the build-up that it is being made for this speech and all these threats and intimidations and videos and propaganda and everything that is kind of building the image that Hezbollah is going to get in, and yet there are so many contacts and questions around this speech tomorrow.
Talk to us about the risks involved. As you say, there seems to be for him some kind of pressure, whether he does or doesn't get fully involved, but clearly huge risks for Hezbollah and also obviously for the people of Lebanon if this does escalate into something major.
Look, I've been saying this from day one. Whatever we've seen with Hamas, it's the same with Hezbollah, except Hezbollah is the big brother. It's the same with the deployment in Lebanon itself, meaning that the missiles and drones and headquarters and Hezbollah's, the infrastructure is inside the towns, inside the villages, inside the homes and the civilian infrastructures. And that's why Nasrallah knows, Lebanese knows that the damage on both sides will be a huge damage. It's not only Israel that is going to suffer from Hezbollah getting full scale into war, it's also going to be a lot of suffering from the Lebanese side. And that's why, by the way, we already see some kind of evacuation and leaving of Lebanese in South Lebanon to other places, or at least trying to get to the bigger towns like Tyre over there. Look, as a resident of the Galilee, I'm kind of worried of both options. I'm worried of the option that it will deteriorate into war, because we all understand the cost of that. And I'm worried of the options that it will not deteriorate into war and there will be a ceasefire and I will have to continue to sleep with the monster. So, it's kind of, we don't know what to wish for over here in the north.
The IDF saying a short while ago a ceasefire is not on the table at the moment. How viable is it anyway, realistically? Who is going to properly agree to any ceasefire terms at this juncture? Your thoughts?
There is no place for a ceasefire with the Nazi monster. Nobody thought that in World War II there will be a ceasefire with Hitler. We should eliminate the capabilities that took the lives of 1,400 Israelis. And it takes what it takes. This is what I feel about it, and I believe that many Israelis feel the same.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserve, Sarit Zahavi, thank you as always, speaking to us live from the Western Galilee. Thank you very much. Eitan, your thoughts on exactly that?
I think that in the north, till now, one day before Nasrallah's speech, and I will say some words about it as well, I think the both sides are still keeping the area from the both sides of the fence as the area of the clashes, of the escalation that is running. But today we have some signs that Hezbollah is expanding the area of launching, but not changing the system till now. But it's not moving the fact that Hezbollah is deployed completely, and it's alert areas ready for using both ground forces and also the rocket system, and using a small amount of people for itself and also some Palestinian organization. I think that we are making mistake. All of us are talking about the fact that we are waiting for Nasrallah. Nasrallah will bring his words, but we have to be on readiness to react immediately as a defensive and offensive by major fire capabilities of IDF major by the Air Force in order to react heavily in the moment that Hezbollah is expanding its activity. In my opinion, the decision has been fallen already few days ago by the pre-meeting in Beirut by the Foreign Affairs Minister of Iran that visit already Turkey, and I guess he informed her, and the arrival of Kahani now to Beirut shows these both people are the admirals of this kind of war, the Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister and Kahani. They are using another 4 proxies, the Houthis, the Shiite militias in Syria, in Iraq, and also, of course, are encouraging the West Bank to continue. And I believe that this decision is escalating, not immediately to the most amount of opportunities. I think, and I hope I will be mistaken, but we have to be readiness for a great escalation in the north.
Just to that point, IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari exposing that Hania is on his way to Iran.
In a private jet plane. In a private
Maybe
jet.
It's a call to Hania to be careful when it's flying.
Something we're going to talk about as well a little bit later. Gentlemen, stay with us right now. I'd like to welcome Eli Beer, President and founder of the United Hatzalah Organization, a volunteer-based emergency medical services organization in Israel. Eli, thank you so much for joining us. You have been at the scene of many terror attacks over the years. Here at the channel, we've spoken to some of your volunteers and responders about the horrors that they saw on the 7th of October. Talk to us about your account, the number of calls you must have received in the early morning on that day, and the scale of what you saw.
Well, on the 7th of October, I was woken up at 6:40 in the morning, and I found myself within 20 minutes at the United Hatzalah Center in Jerusalem, the 122 center that we have, 1221 center that we have, where we get all the phone calls. We were receiving phone calls from parents who were frantic about saving their children. That's all they were talking about, save our children. And I realized we don't have enough dispatching answering the phone calls because this was a Saturday morning, Simchat Torah. So we called out for more and more people to pick up the phones. We had over 60 volunteers arrive immediately from the synagogues near us, wearing the talitot, wearing the talis on them. When I saw them running into the dispatch, I was thinking about the pictures that I had on the that I had as a young kid watching the Yom Kippur War. And this is how it started my day. We had thousands of people calling for help. People were screaming that they're killing us. We had children, we had adults. Our volunteers were deployed from everywhere. We had volunteers who were living there, 900 volunteers who lived in the south of Israel, but we also sent hundreds of more with ambulances and vehicles just to get people out, the victims that were out. We had so many people injured. We couldn't say no to anyone. We were just sending people under fire. And then we heard about our first volunteers who were murdered. An Arab volunteer of United Hatzalah, a volunteer by the name of Awad, a young man who was in the party there. He was a paramedic overseeing the event. He was there. He was there watching over, and he was the first volunteer who was murdered. And the second one was a volunteer from Kriyat Malachi, a young volunteer who also ran to help save lives. And when he got there, he found himself in front of terrorists, and they were shooting back and forth. And unfortunately, he was murdered after he was able to eliminate a few of the terrorists.
Absolutely tragic to think that people who are risking their lives in an active terror rampage have to take that risk like that, and such an outcome that is absolutely devastating. Talk to us, Eli, about how responders are able to try and stay safe. Their own personal safety is obviously at risk while they're trying to save other people's lives. You're talking about hours long this massacre unfolded, and your teams were on the ground, you and your wife there as well. What did you see, and what did you do to stay safe at the same time?
So the first thing we did is send trucks loaded with bulletproof vests and helmets. So the volunteers going into the war zone should actually have some kind of protection. It's not 100% protection, but it has some kind of I would say like a 60 or 65% protection of the body and of the skull. We actually had volunteers injured, and they were saved with the bulletproof vests and helmets. So that was the number one thing we did. Second of all, we told volunteers who have arms to load. Unfortunately, this is crazy. Paramedics had to hold their hands on their arms to protect themselves and protect the people surrounding them.
Unbelievable.
We have very brave volunteers, very, very brave volunteers. Many of them were injured. We had 2 volunteers who were kidnapped. We still don't know what happened to them. This is a tragedy for the whole country, and of course for United Hatzalah as well.
Absolute tragedy. And certainly the unsung heroes, always the paramedics, the medics, the responders who are going to try and do their best to save lives. Phenomenal work by your teams. I understand, I want to take a look at a response further afield. I understand that you have met recently with President Joe Biden here in Israel, and you also met with Donald Trump during a Republican summit in Las Vegas. Talk us through the responses from the current and former presidents of the United States to what is unfolding on the ground right now, this war underway, day 27.
Well, when I met President Biden, he was broken. His heart was broken. I saw him crying in front of my eyes. And then when he gave me a hug, he had literally tears dropping on my shoulders. He took it very hard to his heart. He said that the pain he felt when he lost his kids, his children, he lost one kid in Iraq, one kid in an accident together with his wife. He felt the same pain now than he felt when he lost his own children.
Right.
And it was really genuine, the feeling that I had. He kept saying that you don't need to be a Jew to be a Zionist, which I thought it was outstanding.
Something he said repeatedly, absolutely. And tell us briefly, we don't have much time left, if you don't mind, the response out of Donald Trump, briefly, please.
Donald Trump was very angry, and he said if he wins the presidency, he will make sure that Israel will never face a thing like this. He said the head of the snake has to be chopped, and it's no doubt that it's Iran. Iran are behind this whole massacre and the war against Israel. And he said when he becomes president, he will deal with the head of the snake. I heard him say that. And I don't take sides. I think it's incredible to see the 2 presidents that I met and I spoke to. And I had the honor to show both of them what Israel is facing. Who's our enemies? These are not regular enemies. These are the lowlights of human, and it has to be dealt, and we can't stop. We need to fight them, and they both agreed on this.
And Eli, as you have already alluded to, the nation is in a state of trauma right now, trauma for your team at United Hatzalah as well. But at the same time, there's also much unity and resilience in the country. You've seen the horrors. What message do you have for the country right now, a country in trauma?
Well, I really think we need to win together. We need to all be together. We can't criticize right now the army. We can't criticize the leadership of the government. We have to go together, hand in hand. We could afterwards decide to make any investigation of what happened. But right now, we're all together in this. We need to save our children who are in the army. My own son is in the army now. We want to make sure all of them come back safe. Unfortunately, this is the most brutal war we ever stand in front. This was a war that was forced on us. We need to win. And the only way to win is where we all together, we love each other, and we do chesed, we do good kindness. This is the only way to support each other, hold hands, and fight, and we will win. There is no doubt about it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you speaking to us. Eli Beer, President and founder of United Hatzalah, the unsung heroes risking their lives every day to save others. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And now we continue with our coverage with the latest updates on the ground. Senior defense correspondent Jonathan Regev joins us from southern Israel. We know sirens were sounding earlier on. Herzi Halevi, Jonathan, the IDF chief, saying troops are fighting against absolute evil. What is the latest in the south? What update can you share right now?
So for about an hour, Benita, where we are, we're hearing a very strong artillery pounding at the Gaza Strip. I don't know if you can hear it, but there's lots of artillery for the past hour and a half or so. Quite a lot of artillery. We're hearing it around the area where the incursion began. The aim of the Israeli forces now, an aim which they're about to complete, is basically to cut the Gaza Strip into two parts. Israeli forces have entered the Gaza Strip right behind us, just to the south of the Gaza city itself. And we have to understand the Gaza Strip is a rather narrow place, meaning that the distance from where we are to the Mediterranean coast, meaning cutting the Gaza Strip into two, is not a very long distance. 5-6 miles, something like that. But along those 5 or 6 miles, there's quite a lot of challenges to the forces going in, forces, Hamas terrorists waiting in tunnels, rising up from the tunnels, confronting the forces and going back down. This is what they're dealing with. And as I mentioned, for about an hour and a half, a lot of artillery firing from this location where we are towards the Gaza Strip.
And Jonathan, the issue of fuel being provided to the Gaza Strip is a heated one. The IDF Chief of Staff saying fuel will be provided to Gaza hospitals under supervision once they run out. But the Prime Minister's office releasing a statement earlier saying that Benjamin Netanyahu has not approved any such transfer. Any update on that front?
No, not so much. I mean, it's a debate that's, we have to say, that's above the military level. Allowing fuel or not, that's up for the diplomatic level, let's call it this way. Of course, fuel, which is provided in for humanitarian purposes, will eventually be taken by Hamas for the use of their war machine that they're running. This is something that has to be debated way above the military level.
Thank you so much. Our senior defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, live from southern Israel. Appreciate the update. And now for more, we welcome to our panel Danny Danon, former Israeli ambassador to the UN and member of parliament in the Likud party. Thank you very much for being here, Ambassador. At such a difficult time, since we've just started this broadcast, we've been talking about sirens in the north and in the south. We've been talking about live images out of Gaza. We can see the strikes that are happening as we speak inside Gaza right now. We're talking about the concerns up north and what Hassan Nasrallah may decide to do tomorrow. And this is a nation in trauma, still trying to process the gravity and the scale of what happened on the 7th of October. Your assessment of where things stand right now in this country?
Benita, we are in a war. It's not easy. It's not easy for the population in Israel. More than 200,000 people had to move from their homes, go to other places, to hotels, to relatives. We see the casualties for our forces. But I have to beg about your introduction. We are strong. We have the resilience. We have the strength to stand up and to defeat our enemy. And I would advise our northern neighbors to pay attention to our capabilities. If Nasrallah will decide to fight with us as well, we will bury Hezbollah under the rebel of Lebanon. We are not joking. We have no interest to start a cycle with Hezbollah. But if they will decide to continue and attack us and expand the range of the attacks, we will fight back. And our Air Force, today I had a very interesting meeting with our Air Force. Our Air Force mainly finished the job in Gaza. So now it's more the infantry that is doing the work. We have the capabilities to strike Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they should be aware of it.
Just to be clear, talking about the trauma, we're talking about the psyche of the nation, the civilians and the citizens, no disputing that the IDF is strong. And we're hearing the rhetoric out of leaders in the IDF saying they are ready for any eventuality. That said, over and above what Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah may announce tomorrow, there have been moves out of Yemen, out of Iranian proxies, concerns around even Iraq and what might be happening at the same time. Your confidence in terms of your understanding of Israel's ability right now to handle several threats at the same time, day 27 in a war when people are grieving.
So the Iranian, they're playing a chess game. And they decide how to maneuver with the Houthis, with Hezbollah, with Hamas. We will make sure that those who attack us will pay. But we have to decide where. We can decide to attack in Yemen, in Iran, in Lebanon. It's up to us to decide, and we will retaliate for those attacks. We have the capability of winning a multi-front war. It's not easy. It's challenging. We are a small nation, but we knew that it can happen. So the military planned for it. We will stretch our muscles, but we are capable of defending the population in Israel and at the same time to strike our enemies. And I would advise them, if they would do that, we will use all the power we have against them.
Another threat, so to speak, and it's not a physical one in terms of missiles and rockets, nonetheless, it's quite painful for many, is hearing the rhetoric that you will know well out of the United Nations. Antonio Guterres' comments early on, in the early days of the war, upsetting so many people. And we also know that the sentiment is largely out of the UN against what Israel is doing, something that won't surprise you. That said, there are complicated moves that have to come out of Israel when targeting terror infrastructure that is underneath a hospital, knowing that the world is watching and that the number of civilians who might be hurt in the process is something that is going to concern a lot of people, including in the country and, of course, out of the UN as well. How does the international criticism impact the way Israel is going to conduct its war?
First of all, we can all agree it's shameful. We haven't forgotten what happened on October 7th. We had a ceasefire. They broke the ceasefire. They attacked our communities. They committed atrocities that we haven't seen since the days of the Holocaust. So we are fighting back to defend ourselves. So they tend to forget it. I think we should not expect much from the UN. I wrote to Secretary Guterres because I know him personally. I told him, how dare you? How dare you justify those acts? And he tried to retract his words, but he didn't do it properly because basically he said, I'm not justifying what happened, but, And then he said occupation, the situation in Gaza. Basically, he justified those horrible attacks against us, and that's unacceptable. When I was at the UN, I told my colleagues in the military, you would ever do whatever you have to do. We're going to deal with the Security Council, with the General Assembly, and that's what I'm telling my colleagues today in the military. You do what you have to do. Defend Israel. We fight according to international law. And by the way, according to international law, you are allowed to attack even a hospital if you have terrorists inside the hospital. We don't do it. And basically, I think we should open that discussion, because according to the Geneva Convention, Article 28, if I'm not mistaken, you are allowed to attack a hospital if terrorists are hiding in the hospital, and you give proper notice before you attack the hospital. So we're fighting a very evil, cynical enemy, and I think we should use more force and not to put our forces in danger. But we do it according to international law. We give proper warning. Look what we did. We basically encouraged the population in northern Gaza to move out. More than 80% moved to the south. Even now when we are fighting, when we are maneuvering in northern Gaza, we left an open corridor for the civilians who want still to go and move out. So we are doing whatever we can to lower the casualties among civilians. Hamas are doing exactly the opposite. They want to see the babies, they want to see the horrible pictures of civilians being killed. But that's the war we are fighting.
Would you expect some kind of condemnation from the UN or any other global entity right now for the war crime one might expect taking, as we were discussing, 244 people across a border, holding them hostage, ranging in age from a baby to a man in his 80s? Surely the condemnation, the concerns about laws around a war should be around that move.
You know, you spoke about the mental situation, and we cannot sleep at night when we know there are 30 babies today in the tunnels of Hamas, babies. That's unimaginable. And those cynical diplomats at the UN, they tend to ignore it when it comes to Jewish blood. It's too cheap for them. That's unacceptable. We should do whatever we can to release those hostages, to use whatever force we have to win the war against Hamas, and not to rely on the international community. We saw where they stand. When Canada tried to amend the resolution in the General Assembly, and they only asked them to condemn Hamas, they couldn't get the majority for that. So we should have zero expectation from the UN, and we should have 100% support for the IDF.
Are you surprised that Jordan has recalled its ambassador over this war?
No, you know, I have seen in the past the situation when countries in the Arab League, they have to play the game, they have to condemn Israel, but they know very well that the radical Muslims that attacked us, they pose a threat to the moderate Arab countries in the region. So I think they will not say it out loud, but they are worried about those radicals gaining more capabilities or winning a battle. So they will not say that they support us, but I think every normal human being in the Middle East, in the Muslim Arab world, wants Israel to defeat Hamas.
These are live images on our screen right now over Gaza as those strikes continue, as you say, efforts by the IDF to defeat Hamas. Ambassador, final question, and that is around the state of play, which clearly is not top of mind as the war continues, but is something that will be discussed down the line, and that is relations potentially between Saudi Arabia and Israel. What is your take on the role Riyadh could be playing in any level right now, the day after for Gaza potentially, and what all the unfolding developments right now could mean for potential relations down the line?
So, Benita, I was here a few weeks ago, and we discussed the potential agreements with the Saudis, expanding the Abraham Accords. And I would not be surprised that one of the goals was to put all those negotiations on a hold. And they succeeded. But I can tell you that in the future, I'm optimistic. I spoke with some of my colleagues in the Gulf, and they believe in the Abraham Accords. And I think in the future, we will see more countries, including Saudi Arabia, will join the Abraham Accords. Now it looks not relevant because we're in the middle of a war. They have to take sides. But I think at the end of the day, we are all fighting the same evil. And I think we have a lot of place to maneuver and to cooperate with them.
Very briefly, the country was very divided politically before this war started. Now we are seeing billboards across the country about victory, about being together. We're seeing volunteers all over the country trying to help. Your assessment of that resilience right now, the state of play within the country as we speak?
It gives all of us a lot of encouragement to see that people are coming together, standing together, putting all the political difficulties and argument aside, fighting together. You know, today when you go and you visit the troops in the south, you see Orthodox Jews, secular Israelis, left, right, people from the kibbutzim, people from the yeshivot. That's the beauty of Israel. And that's why I know that we will win, because we know how to come together. And I hope that we will also learn the lesson for the future. When we win the war, we'll have to look deep side what happened and what we can learn for the future.
Many questions will be asked, many lessons learned. Danny Danon, former Israeli ambassador to the UN and member of parliament in the Likud party. Thank you very much for being here in studio. And earlier on this day, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi delivered this statement, day 27 of the war, reiterating, quote, "This is our home. We have no other country." He says troops are operating inside Gaza City. We saw those live images just a short while ago. He also says the IDF has an obligation to return home all the hostages. IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari saying ground forces have completely surrounded Gaza City. He also says the term ceasefire is not at all on the table at the moment. Let's take a listen.
IDF soldiers are surrounding Gaza City, the center of the terrorist organization Hamas. In the last hours, armored corps and infantry, with the assistance of the Air Force, targeted Hamas posts, launch pads, and other terror infrastructure used by Hamas and its terrorists. Engineering corps are locating ground threats, explosives, dismantling them and neutralizing them, allowing our forces to move freely. Our combat forces are engaging in face-to-face battles. In every battle, the IDF comes out on top. We are constantly operating from the air and the sea. When we come across a battle, if needed, we go back, attack from the air and the sea, and then continue. This is repeated again and again. Our officers are leading the fight with great bravery with the soldiers. This is how the IDF operates. The IDF is fighting with full force against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But have no doubt, if you want to know who is taking part in the war, you can look at one of the leaders of the murderous Hamas terror group, Ismail Haniyeh, visiting Iran today, arriving by a private jet. The warm welcome he receives signals that Iran is pushing its proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and others, to try to divert our focus from Gaza. We are focusing on Hamas, on dismantling it and bringing the hostages home. While Haniyeh is flying on private planes, the IDF is attacking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, military posts, terror infrastructure, launch pads, and weapons caches. Many targets were hit tonight in response to artillery fire earlier today from Lebanon into northern Israel. In the West Bank, the IDF, along with the Shin Bet, continue to battle Palestinian terror, arresting dozens of terrorists every night, foiling attacks at any time. So far, we have spoken to the families of 242 hostages and the families of 335 deceased. Our hearts are with the families.
And still with us in studio, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangat, former military secretary to 3 ministers of defense and former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF, and political commentator Daniel Sheck, former Israeli ambassador to France. And Daniel, I want to pick up with you on the issue of the hostages. Again, it's something I know you're working on very intently and something that the nation is waiting to hear about. The people who are being held hostage are from a range of countries, more than 25 different countries. So talk to us about the diplomatic efforts to try and secure the release of these hostages. We know Qatar is supposed to be brokering something, but realistically, who else is involved behind the scenes?
Listen, Benita, of course, a country will pay special attention to its own citizens. That's, as a citizen, that is what you would expect from your government. So hostages who have a foreign citizenship, a foreign nationality, can expect and should expect their governments to do an extra effort. But I, as not just as an Israeli, as a human being, would consider this phenomenon of taking over 240 people hostage and brutally taking them into Gaza, I would consider this as a concern for the entire international community, regardless of if you have your own citizens held there or not. So when we talk to ambassadors and other foreign representatives, many of them have come to Israel to show their solidarity. Many of them come to the forum of the families to meet families. And it's an important thing for both sides to sort of break up this big mosaic of human beings into a real face, into a real pair of eyes, into a real human story. So what we tell them is very simple. Yes, of course, you will make an extra effort to free your citizens, but once they are free, we expect you to continue the fight, to fight for the others as if they were yours.
Eitan.
I think that putting the goal of releasing the hostages as one of the main two goals for the operation in Gaza, it's not easy, but it shows the direction of this country. First of all, as a duty to its civilians, and secondly, of course, the second duty is to give mothers the opportunity to open a window very close next time to the border with Gaza without seeing the Hamas on the other side. But we have to be very open to say that sometimes both goals are not meeting, and sometimes it's helping one to the other. What does it mean? It means, I think, that what we saw till now from the Qatarian step or the others shows a seriously attitude by Hamas. It's using it as a tool in order to make the timetable of the attack as more comfortable for them, to create situation that they will organize themselves under this kind of fire. I think that the fact that Israel chose at the beginning to continue with its attack, meanwhile, there is a lot of intelligence effort to identify places, to have some information from investigation, and to create more and more picture that will maybe bring us to serve this kind of opportunity. But in my opinion, the fact that there are divide between few nations as a civilianship that some of them have, it will be a mistake. We have to make such agreement only by one condition, one big package that everybody will be released, unless the Hamas, we know them, they are not human beings. They will try to make it for years, or even to create differences that we will, in some cases, we will not see the people at all at the future. So it's something that helping on one end the kind of involvement of the international community. It's a duty, but it is a duty to coordinate between all of them, to make one demand: release everybody together. You have a business with such and such countries, and with Israel as the responsibility for all of them, and you have to make it immediately. If not, and I think that now, unfortunately, it's not, we have to continue to make this kind of pressure, because for Hamas, it can be used as an exit point, while the pressure on them will be very, very close towards the end of the life of the leadership, for example.
Well, of course, I agree with Eitan that the goal has to be everyone. But realistically, I'm not sure that that's going to happen, because even if strategically as a plan this is true, if there is an offer on the table for a partial agreement, a partial exchange, it will be very difficult to turn down, very difficult, including, by the way, because of international pressure. Now, Israel is not obligated to accept every offer. By the way, there were a few offers already. There were things floated, and the fact is that it didn't happen. But I think that not only because of that, because I think Hamas has a real incentive to cut a deal on the hostages. I don't think that they plan to have nearly 250 hostages with elderly people, sick people, babies. 50 Thais. Why would they kidnap Thai workers? Why don't they release them? What did they expect to achieve, to receive from the Thai government? Absolutely nothing. Logically, they should just let them walk, let them go. Well, this doesn't seem to be the fact for the moment. So I agree. And by the way, the Family Forum has this slogan: "Everyone for everyone, all the hostages for all the prisoners."
Daniel, what was the reaction?
Add one sentence to Danny. He's right when we are sitting and analyze it, but we are dealing with murderers, that are even more in a short time than the Nazis. In some cases, even I'm not comparing one to another. And I think it's time that Israel will have much more achievement from the international community under the negotiations we are working with the West world. It's time to make a block. It's time to demand by Israel and to get some achievements from the international communities, not just to the visits here, by the mainly high figures on the Western world that came here. They should go back being convinced on the need to be released, everybody together. Can I divide between a baby of 9 years old with a lady of 85, with a Thai, with a German, with a French people, and with a female soldier? No. It's something that has been done together. I'm not talking about the end game. I'm talking about the demand, and I think we are mistaken, and we are making mistake by immediately making such a policy.
Well, we're not. But it should be said. But this is not the policy.
But besides, we have to add another operator to this field, the Qatarian. It's not only the Hamas. I think Qatarian, it's a little bit embarrassing them, the situation, to be pointed from the Israelis, from the international community, enough playing this kind of game by on one end sponsoring and helping build the force of murderer people, on the other end playing the game like they are a Western country. So these are the real address, the Qatarian and not Hamas. Ania is flying from Qatar to Tehran, and the Mashal is flying from Qatar to Beirut, and Qatar is sponsoring most of what we saw at the 7th of October. They sponsor it under covering like they are giving money to the poor people in Gaza, and they should pay now the answer for their activities by being the major factor on releasing everybody together. And on time coming, we will see the results. Israel and maybe other countries, but Israel at the first place has to choose to check its relationship and policy towards Qatar. It's enough to be cheated by the Qatarian and to cheat yourself like you are agreed for something that does not exist.
Yeah, I think the Qataris have a simple choice now, and I hope they fall to the right direction. They can either go down in history as the collaborators of these worst perpetrators of the century. I mean, it's difficult to describe the enormity.
Pure evil.
Or they can be the heroes of this story. They can end up being the heroes if they secure the safe release of 245 people, most of them civilians. That's their choice. And as Eitan said, if they want to be part of the modern world, of the Western world, the choice should be actually quite easy.
We're looking at the picture on our screen earlier from Yocheved Lifshitz, and if you had a look at the pictures of her before this war and what she looked like when she was released, two entirely different people. There'll still be many questions if those who are released, how they're being treated there, but obviously that is for down the line. I'd like your take, Daniel, on what is happening in terms of efforts right now to try and make sure that the children there are okay. Is there any information? There are some children who are there who have lost their parents. They are now orphans and they don't know that. What is known about that kind of support It's beyond heartbreaking, it's beyond evil, it's difficult to even hear it.
Zero information. As simple as that.